Wandering through the dense woods, an elderly elf questions his granddaughter if a house truly exists within the dreaded abyssal forest. Lifa, the young elf, confidently assures her grandfather that they are nearing their unbelievable destination. Halting before the structure, the old man notes that even the previous demon lord feared to enter this very place. Staring in utter disbelief, the two elves wonder if their eyes are deceiving them. Looming before them stands a massive, impeccably built mansion completely out of place in the wild wilderness. Pushing open the heavy iron gates, the grandfather declares they must uncover who built this mysterious estate. As they step onto the grounds, an oppressive aura makes their every footstep feel unbearably heavy. Sensing the creeping dread, the old man warns Lifa to be ready to run at a moment's notice. A dark, swirling shadow dominates their memory as they recall their fateful first encounter with the Immortal King. In a vibrant garden tended by golems, the smiling young Immortal King stands triumphantly beside Lifa and her grandfather. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the eerie woods, a disoriented figure awakens and groggily questions his surroundings. Gasping in shock, a glowing silhouette of a young man manifests amidst the dark trees. Trembling from the surrounding oppressive aura, the mysterious figure wonders what could possibly be wrong with this dreadful forest. Panic setting in, he sprints frantically through the rustling underbrush in search of a safe place to hide. Breaking through the brush, he spots the gaping entrance of a stone cavern and rushes toward it. Pausing at the dark threshold, the exhausted fugitive pants heavily as he catches his breath. Peering into the gloom, he realizes the natural tunnel stretches deep into the earth. Fearing what might follow him inside, he decides it is much safer to venture further into the depths. Deep within the cave, an intricately carved stone doorway stands silently waiting. Stepping before the ancient frame, he breathes a sigh of relief as the weird presence finally fades away. Frustrated by his inexplicable situation, he recalls coming home from work and going straight to bed just yesterday. Looking down in sheer terror, he realizes with a gasp that his entire body is transparent. Floating without feet, the terrified young man wonders if he is actually dead. Gripping his head in despair, he realizes he cannot even remember his own name or the cause of his demise. Suddenly, a glowing digital status screen materializes, identifying him as a level 1 ghost and a soul from another world. Staring at the floating text, he likens the bizarre interface to a video game status screen. Reading further, he discovers that a ghost is merely a deceased soul transformed into a demon by dense magical energy. Gloom washes over him as he realizes he has been reincarnated as the absolute weakest tier of demon. Slumping in defeat, he laments that the mysterious screen offers zero clues about his past life. Refusing to remain nameless in his second life, he decides to simply grant himself a new moniker. Recalling a faint fondness for games and heroic tales, he contemplates his options. Channeling his inner gamer, he proudly claims the cool and heroic name Sigmund. Without warning, the screen flashes brightly as a strange sensation washes over him. Overwhelmed by the sudden shock, Sigmund cries out and nearly collapses. Flailing in sheer panic, he wonders if ghosts can actually die or lose consciousness from simple fear. The system's screen updates automatically, crowning Sigmund with the rare title of Special Named Monster. Swiping through the prompt, he realizes this unique evolution just saved him from vanishing into nothingness. Gathering his wits, Sigmund deduces that the oppressive aura outside belongs to the powerful demons roaming this world. Acknowledging his status as the weakest monster, he notes that stepping into that dangerous forest guarantees his immediate destruction. Concluding that dying again is entirely out of the question, he resolves to delve even deeper into the mysterious cavern. Realizing he is only at the entrance of the cavern, Sigmund hopes that moving deeper to face weaker magic energy will allow him to level up safely. Floating deeper into the rocky tunnel, he cautiously explores his new subterranean surroundings. Spotting a massive rat in the darkness, the spectral boy wonders if the squeaking creature is actually a demon. Opening his status screen, he reads that his Drain Touch skill steals life force upon physical contact, making direct attacks unnecessarily dangerous. Slowly and stealthily, he creeps toward the unsuspecting rat to test out his only offensive ability. With a sudden swoosh, he launches his transparent body directly at the giant rodent. Shouting his attack name, he slams his ethereal hands onto the terrified creature to initiate Drain Touch. The skill activates instantly, forcefully sucking the life energy out of the struggling beast. He exclaims in sheer surprise as a sudden, invigorating surge of power flows vigorously through his ghostly form. The rat lets out a final, weak squeak before collapsing lifelessly onto the cavern floor. With a sudden twitch and a soft puff, the rat's physical body vanishes completely into thin air. A small, glowing magic stone drops onto the ground and rolls to a stop where the monster just perished. Reaching out in amazement, Sigmund realizes that his ghostly fingers can successfully hold the physical orb. As he crushes the stone with a loud crack, a strange new energy immediately begins flowing into him. A system notification chimes to announce his level up to Ghost Level 2 and the acquisition of a brand new skill. He deduces that his unique Soul Drain ability allows him to constantly grow stronger by absorbing skills directly from defeated demons' magic stones. Knowing he is currently one of the absolute weakest demons, he resolves to steadily sneak around and defeat enemies to ensure his survival. The system screen confirms his successful acquisition of the useful resistance to sickness skill. Without warning, another giant rat aggressively lunges right at him with a furious squeal. Bracing himself for the painful impact, Sigmund screams as the beast chomps down. To his utter shock, the rat's massive jaws pass completely harmlessly through his transparent body. Blinking in confusion, he looks down at his perfectly uninjured arm while the confused beast squeaks behind him. Realizing with a triumphant grin that physical attacks are completely useless against ghosts, he confidently prepares his counterattack. He aggressively dives into the rat pack, mercilessly utilizing Drain Touch on multiple terrified creatures at once. Multiple magic stones fall to the stony ground with a soft tinkle as he systematically clears out the horde. Slithering among the glowing stones, he wonders if he has already maxed out the skills he can learn from simple rats. Looking up in absolute horror, he spots a colossal, terrifying centipede demon looming menacingly over him. Reassuring himself that physical blows cannot harm him, he nervously prepares to use Drain Touch, as the massive bug wriggles violently. After successfully absorbing its stone, he gains the poison creation and resistance to poison skills. Observing a hissing creature nearby, he casually notes that deadly poison doesn't seem to affect his incorporeal state anyway. Swishing confidently past a massive beetle, he effortlessly rolls its magic stone away for consumption. Apologizing briefly to the non-threatening bug, he pops its magic stone to gain the Poor Diet skill in his relentless quest to level up. Wandering further into the depths, he notes that the cavern's confusing, labyrinth-like paths perfectly resemble an RPG dungeon. He theorizes that this complex dungeon likely contains multiple separated floors waiting to be explored. Peering into the gloom, he spots a dark set of carved stone stairs leading further down into the earth. Before descending into the dangerous lower level, he wisely decides to double-check his current status screen. The interface reveals he has reached level 10 and accumulated a diverse variety of new skills, making an evolution immediately available. He notes that evolving at a mere level 10 is quite fitting for the world's weakest creature as he carefully reviews his branching options. Weighing the choice between a martial arts-capable skeleton and a dark magic-wielding high ghost, Sigmund eagerly makes his final selection. Sigmund enthusiastically decides to proceed with the high ghost evolution. Glowing brightly with a sudden flash of light, he officially evolves into a high ghost and lets out a confused sound. Examining his updated status screen, he notes that while his appearance hasn't changed much, he has gained dark magic and a host of improved skills. Smiling brightly, he relishes the feeling of overflowing magical energy and realizes that magic truly is the essence of another world. Eager to test his new strength, he confidently decides to descend to the lower floor. Floating down the stone staircase, the small ghost illuminates the dark passage with his ethereal glow. Glancing around the new level, he notes that the subterranean scenery doesn't look much different from above. A sudden fluttering sound echoes from the darkness as an unseen creature approaches. Preparing himself for combat, he decides to quickly take the creature out using Drain Touch. Screeching aggressively, a monstrous bat swoops down toward him with terrifying speed. Caught completely off guard by the creature's sudden appearance, he gasps in shock. The bat slashes fiercely into his arm, causing him to cry out in genuine pain. Fluttering away, the bat circles back as Sigmund realizes he just took actual physical damage from the attack. Refusing to take another hit, he powers up his magic and declares he is putting an end to this. With a swift snatching motion, he reaches out to grab the aggressive flying beast. He violently blasts the captured creature with a burst of dark energy, obliterating it instantly. Panting heavily and slumping in relief, he admits that the sudden damaging attack genuinely surprised him. Absorbing the dropped magic stone, he receives a notification that he has learned the wind magic skill. He deduces that magic-imbued attacks can successfully injure spirit-type demons, though he manages to restore his health using Drain Touch. Looking forward with renewed determination, he promises himself that he needs to be far more cautious from now on. Wandering further into the dungeon, he cautiously navigates the narrow stone corridors. Peeking around a rocky corner, he is shocked to discover another ghost lingering in the cavern. Staring at the muscular, chiseled apparition, he hilariously questions if such a handsome ghost is normal in this world. Observing the spirit closely, he realizes it lacks free will and merely wanders the same area like a standard game enemy. Deciding to take the initiative, he aggressively charges up his newly acquired magic. Thrusting his hands forward, he unleashes a powerful wind cutter spell toward his undead opponent. The magical attack strikes true, instantly destroying the muscular ghost with a loud puff. Trembling with fear, he realizes that if he had taken a direct hit from that spell, he would have been obliterated in a single strike. Acknowledging his desperate need for more strength, he proceeds to steadily grind his way through the lower floors. He mercilessly blasts a goblin-like demon with his swirling wind magic. Finally reaching the third floor, he cautiously creeps along the stone walls. Spotting a new group of small fry demons, he reminds himself to remain extremely cautious against unfamiliar enemies. A sudden beam of magical energy shoots past his face, narrowly missing him. After successfully dispatching the attacker, a system beep informs him that he has acquired the light magic skill. Clutching his face in shock, he realizes how close he came to death and deduces that light magic is definitely his elemental weak point. Curious about his new ability, he wonders if a dark ghost like him can even safely wield light magic. Summoning a small orb of glowing light, he stares at it in quiet contemplation. As the orb stings his ghostly flesh with buzzing electricity, he concludes that he can use the magic despite taking minor damage from it. Scooping up more magic stones, he happily reflects on how incredibly useful light magic has proven against the dungeon's undead inhabitants. A bold status screen announces that he has reached the 9th floor and that another evolution is now available. Sitting triumphantly among defeated skeletons, Sigmund prepares to choose his next form. The system interface presents him with the Holy Race, Light Zombie, and Skeleton Monk evolution options. He theorizes that his newly acquired light magic resistance unlocked these new evolutionary paths. Clicking on the Skeleton Monk option, he gleefully initiates the transformation. His ethereal form solidifies into a bony skeleton, leaving him thrilled to finally have a physical body again. Clacking his new jaws, he rejoices at the sensation of actually standing on solid ground. Reviewing his updated status, he notes that his skeletal form allows him to level up martial arts skills obtained from defeated goblins. Bashing his way through the dungeon, he excitedly watches his stats grow until another evolution triggers. Scratching his head, he realizes he got so addicted to grinding levels that he accidentally descended to the 100th floor. Now evolved into an Ereboro's Lord, he proudly notes that his unique title has completely removed his level cap. Staring up at a massive, intimidating door, he knows the only thing left to do is face the dungeon boss. Steeling his nerves for the ultimate battle, he pushes forward into the unknown. A colossal black dragon looms menacingly within the chamber, waiting to challenge him. Drawing his sword with a sharp swish, he confidently orders the massive beast to bring it on. The giant monster shifts its immense weight to prepare a devastating strike. A fierce shockwave ripples through the air as the battle officially begins. The dragon unleashes a massive blast of dark energy, forcing Sigmund to brace himself against the overwhelming force. Gritting his teeth against the onslaught, he notes that a true dragon's attack easily pierces his resistances. Relying on his high-speed regeneration skill, he rapidly heals the damage taken. The fierce clash continues as metal sparks violently against dragon scales. Rattling from the heavy impacts, he curses the unbelievable hardness of the beast's armored hide. He charges forward fearlessly, swinging his massive sword directly at the monster. Glaring intensely at his monstrous foe, he acknowledges that holding back will guarantee his death. The dragon snaps its massive jaws, narrowly missing him as he dodges the lethal bite. The beast unleashes another terrifying, ground-shaking roar. Combining high-speed flight and gravity magic, Sigmund forcefully launches himself at the towering creature. Slashing fiercely with his blade, he successfully lands a deep cut as the dragon groans in pain. Touching down gracefully, he celebrates that his magical combination attack actually breached its defenses. Suddenly, a shocking blur of movement catches him completely off guard. The dragon slams its massive claws into the ground with terrifying force. Grinding his teeth in pure agony, he curses as the beast's heavy weight pins him down. The beast crushes him mercilessly, sending a violent splatter of blood across the floor. A massive, armored tail sweeps brutally across the shattered battlefield. Screaming in pain, he gets violently swatted away by the sweeping blow. The dragon lunges forward with astonishing speed to finish its prey. Standing battered and covered in his own blood, he realizes his body is critically damaged. Leaping desperately through the air, he attempts a final, risky counterattack. Clamping his jaws directly onto the dragon's neck, he violently activates his vampiric drain. Stepping forward with renewed power, he reveals that his Ouroboros Lord form is the ultimate vampire evolution. Proudly declaring his undead supremacy, he vows that he will not fall easily, even to a mighty dragon. With a sudden burst of speed, Sigmund leaps desperately away as the dragon's jaws snap shut on thin air. Debris scatters as the mighty beast's heavy attack violently shatters the surrounding stony ground. Having finally bested the black dragon, he perches triumphantly upon its massive, slain body while panting heavily. Slumping over with a tired sigh, he notes with a weak chuckle how ridiculously strong the dungeon boss truly was. Sitting atop the fallen dragon, he breathes deeply and realizes how many grueling hours it took to claim victory. A cheerful chime announces his successful acquisition of the Black Dragon boss's rare drop items. Straining with effort, the victorious vampire slowly pushes open the massive, ornate treasure chest that materialized before him. Pulling out his newly acquired loot, he is thrilled to discover a magnificent sword, a new coat, and an absolute mountain of glittering coins. Inspecting his spoils using appraisal glasses, he notes that these items are of incredibly high quality compared to his previous dungeon drops. Holding the newly acquired Dragon Slayer blade Ascalon, he chuckles weakly as he wishes he had found this weapon before fighting the actual dragon. Preparing to leave the dungeon, he utilizes his magic to swiftly soar up toward the surface. Landing smoothly back on solid ground, his long hair and coat billow behind him in the sudden rush of air. Emerging with a sudden swoosh, he arrives in a lush, green forest that feels strangely familiar. Glancing up at the leafy canopy as birds screech above, he realizes he has returned to the very forest where he first awoke. Taking in his surroundings, he realizes that the forest's magical energy feels incredibly weak compared to the dungeon's lowest floors. Surrounded by a sudden aura of gloom, he hilariously questions why he even started dungeon crawling in the first place. Standing in the vibrant forest, Sigmund wonders how many years he spent lurking in the dungeon and feels like he has been missing out on the world. A sudden rumbling sound from behind violently interrupts his peaceful thoughts. Tapping his chest, he smiles in relief that his long grind allowed him to finally gain a real physical body, but the rumbling quickly draws his attention. He watches as the dungeon entrance completely collapses into rubble, realizing it is because he successfully cleared the entire labyrinth. A sudden system chime alerts him that he has received a new title, prompting him to check his updated status screen. His extensive status screen reveals his staggering level 126 as an Ouroboros Lord, boasting a massive collection of maxed-out magic, combat skills, and newly acquired immunities. Reviewing his new titles, he realizes that the grueling dungeon he just conquered was known as the Labyrinth of the Abyss. Scratching his head, he wonders what his next course of action should be now that he is completely free. He takes a determined step forward, ready to embark on a new journey in the untamed wilderness. Remembering that the forest is filled with weaker monsters, he activates his covert skill to completely hide his presence as he swishes through the brush. Contemplating his next move, he decides against leaving the forest to avoid being persecuted by humans who might recognize him as a vampire. Having had his fill of life-and-death struggles in the dungeon, he decides to retreat somewhere deep into the forest to simply take it easy. He figures that since he originally popped up as a monster in this very forest, staying here will naturally provide a comforting sense of home. With a sudden burst of speed, he leaps high into the air to explore his vast new surroundings. Soaring high above the tree canopy, he takes in the breathtaking view of the wilderness below. Floating silently over the lush landscape, he surveys the sprawling mountains and a distant winding river. Staring in absolute awe, he marvels at the sheer beauty of the completely untouched natural scenery. Spotting a sparkling river in the distance, he decides to fly over and investigate since there is more than enough land to choose for his new base. Landing softly beside the riverbank, he crouches down to admire the incredibly clear, sparkling water. Scooping up a handful of the refreshing water, he splashes his face and shivers at the sudden coldness. Thirsty from his long journey, he eagerly gulps down the crystal-clear river water. Wiping his mouth with a satisfied smile, he exclaims that the water tastes absolutely delicious. Looking back on his dungeon days, he realizes that the only thing he ever tasted down there was the foul blood of monsters. He chuckles at his own poor diet, noting that a typical vampire would normally feast on the blood of a beautiful maiden instead of gross dungeon creatures. Catching his reflection in the water's surface, he pauses to inspect his newly acquired humanoid face. Staring wide-eyed at his own reflection, he hilariously questions the identity of the incredibly pretty guy looking back at him. Touching his smooth silver hair, he realizes that he looks completely different from his previous life before reincarnating. Tossing his hair back confidently, he decides that his good looks do not matter much since he plans to isolate himself in the woods anyway. He notes that his light-resistant skill must be the reason he can safely walk in sunlight and see his reflection, unlike typical vampires. With a confident swoosh, he officially decides to build his new base right next to the refreshing river. Analyzing the area, he observes that the ambient magic weakens southward across the river, where clearings naturally form in the forest. Prioritizing disaster prevention and a quiet life, he deduces that a higher elevation on the southern side of the river would be the perfect spot to settle. Landing gracefully on his chosen plot of land, he prepares to start his new construction project. Activating his dark magic shadow storage, he reaches into the void and pulls out his massive dragon slayer blade. With a sharp cry of exertion, he leaps toward the thick tree line to begin clearing out the brush. His mighty blade slices effortlessly through the sturdy tree trunks with a loud crack. The severed trees immediately begin to topple over with a heavy, thundering rumble. Unleashing a rapid flurry of devastating slashes, he decimates the surrounding vegetation in a spectacular display of overwhelming power. Proudly admiring his handiwork, he notes that he just needs to keep cutting cleanly to prepare his campsite. Sweating nervously as he looks at the massive, empty crater he just created, he sheepishly admits that he might have overdone it a little bit. Standing in the forest, he begins to finalize his grand plan for his new territory. Estimating a massive 500-meter square area for his base, he figures that going big is the safest bet. With the land completely cleared out, he immediately begins brainstorming a blueprint for his new home. Sketching his ideas, he decides to build a Western-style manor in the center surrounded by a canal and farming plots. Rolling up his sleeves with a confident smirk, he declares that it is time to get to work. Activating gravity magic, he forcefully presses down on the earth to create a solid foundation. He notes that failing to properly pack the dirt would cause his future dream house to slowly sink into the ground. Unleashing a massive wave of earth magic, he expertly reinforces the newly compacted soil. With the foundation perfectly set, he proudly admires his completed basement level. Reaching into his shadow storage, he prepares to tackle the massive piles of harvested timber. Knowing that freshly cut wood warps as it dries, he brilliantly decides to extract the moisture instantly using water magic. Thrilled by his successful magical drying technique, he shifts his focus to building sturdy stone walls for the perimeter. Utilizing his earth magic once again, he begins effortlessly shaping massive rocks into perfect building blocks. He meticulously stacks the newly formed bricks to create an imposing wall around his property. As the sun slowly dips below the horizon, he continues working tirelessly into the night. Days and nights blur together as he loses himself completely in the rhythmic flow of magical construction. Standing before a gorgeous two-story brick manor, he cheers triumphantly at his finished masterpiece. He marvels at his dream house, noting that he even included a fully functional bath and toilet despite barely needing them. Refusing to live without modern comforts, he uses alchemy to magically install lighting, air conditioning, and a stove. Stepping into the spacious living room, he acknowledges that the interior is still completely bare. With plenty of time on his hands, he resolves to handcraft all of his furniture and tools from scratch. Throwing his hands up in pure joy, he celebrates the exciting beginning of his craftsman lifestyle. Leaning over his workbench, he skillfully handles a large pelt during his third year of isolation. Recalling his first year, he remembers carefully assembling wooden chairs for his empty home. Reaching his 10th year, he perfectly executes delicate wirework to further decorate his expanding estate. By his 20th year, he is furiously hammering away at a glowing anvil to master the art of blacksmithing. Admiring a perfectly forged knife, he praises himself for taking the time to build a dedicated smithing hut. Suddenly snapping back to reality, he questions why he has spent decades grinding crafting skills instead of enjoying a peaceful retirement. Slumping over in utter defeat, he hilariously admits that he simply cannot stop grinding once he gets absorbed in a task. Realizing he hasn't even plowed his fields yet, he finally decides to take a much-needed break from crafting. A few days later, while casually washing dishes, a sudden noise catches his attention. Peering out through the magical barrier, he detects two non-hostile human presences approaching his gate. Listening to their hesitant footsteps, he wonders if these strangers are the actual owners of the forest. Stepping outside, he nervously realizes he might need to apologize for illegally clearing the land while wondering how long it has been since he last spoke to anyone. Opening the door, he casually asks the two terrified elves if they are his guests. The elderly elf and his granddaughter tremble in absolute terror as the overwhelming pressure of his magical aura washes over them. The old man suddenly collapses from the sheer pressure, prompting Sigmund to rush forward in a panic. Realizing his mistake, he quickly suppresses his wildly leaking magic to prevent any further harm. Apologizing profusely, he notes that these visitors must be incredibly sensitive to magical energy. Gently lifting the unconscious guests, he decides to carry them inside to rest in his newly built guest room. Coughing up a dark substance, a mysterious residue spatters heavily onto the floor. Realizing he cannot simply wipe away the mess by hand, Sigmund decisively casts light magic purification. The shadowy stain instantly breaks apart and drifts away as glowing embers. Sparkling particles of light gently fade into the air, leaving the room completely spotless. A delicate teacup softly clacks against its ceramic saucer. Humming with satisfaction, Sigmund notes that the tea he brewed from foraged forest leaves turned out exceptionally well. A soft tapping sound echoes as the elderly demon stirs from his rest. Waking up, the old man deeply apologizes for the trouble they caused while Sigmund warmly asks if he is feeling better. Waving off the formal apology, Sigmund casually offers his recovering guest a fresh cup of tea. Taking a grateful sip, the elder praises the magnificent aroma and taste, declaring the leaves to be truly excellent. Acknowledging the compliment, the old man curiously asks if Sigmund is the sole resident of the house. Introducing himself as Sable, the guest explains that he lives on the northern outskirts of the abyssal forest. Revealing his own name, Sigmund cheerfully points out that they are actually neighbors. Suddenly breaking into a nervous sweat, Sigmund silently panics over the possibility that he cleared someone else's property to build his home. Breathing a heavy sigh of relief, Sigmund relaxes completely when Sable assures him that the forest belongs to absolutely no one. Staring intently at his host, Sable asks directly if Master Sigmund is actually a vampire. Sighing internally over impending racial prejudices, Sigmund carefully admits that he is at least a specific type of vampire. Hoping for a peaceful resolution, Sigmund brandishes a silver utensil to prove his light attributes eliminate his need for blood and immunize him to sunlight. Utterly shocked by this legendary revelation, Lefa clatters her teacup and screams for her grandfather. Overwhelmed by the display of impossible power, Sable suddenly collapses forward onto the table. Reassuring his panicked granddaughter, the old man insists he is perfectly fine and orders her to calm down. Mistakenly assuming his magic knocked the old man out, a flustered Sigmund quickly offers to brew some tea for Lefa. Without any warning, Sable slides out of his chair and drops straight to the floor. A bewildered Sigmund lets out a confused gasp as the elderly demon formally addresses him. Bowing deeply in complete prostration, Sable begs Sigmund to take him and his granddaughter as his retainers. Shocked by the heavy request, Sigmund scrambles to seat the old man while Lefa cries out in sheer disbelief. Desperately trying to regain control of the situation, Sigmund asks for a clear explanation of what being a retainer actually entails. Sable explains that a retainer forms a magical contractual relationship, pledging absolute loyalty and losing the ability to disobey their master. Processing the intense severity of the magical bond, Sigmund immediately rejects the idea in his mind. Anticipating the vampire's hesitation, Sable quickly interjects to assure him that the contract provides significant benefits as well. Delving into demon biology, the elder explains that while demon evolution is extremely rare, serving a superior master can sometimes trigger an evolutionary leap. Sweating nervously, Sigmund mentally panics because he is technically an undead monster who has already evolved multiple times. Sable remains firmly bowed, staring up at his prospective master with unwavering intensity. Chuckling at what he assumes is a light-hearted joke, Sable firmly states that demons and the undead are entirely different species. Completely unaware of Sigmund's true origins, the old man confidently declares that skeletons and zombies absolutely cannot evolve into ghouls or vampires. Assuming Sigmund was just trying to ease their tension, Sable apologizes while a frustrated Lefa yells at him to stop. Clearing his throat to change the subject, Sigmund asks why they would choose him when they could easily find other vampires. Gazing up with intense reverence, Sable passionately declares that Sigmund must be an immensely powerful Ouroboros vampire lord. Rambling about the legendary rarity of vampire lords, Sable explains that a demon's instinct to seek strength makes ignoring this opportunity deeply shameful. Realizing the demon kingdom is governed entirely by meatheads who worship strength, Sigmund quietly vows to keep his distance. Analyzing his guests, Sigmund notes they lack ill will and realizes he would be thankful for their knowledge of this world. Warning them of his mundane lifestyle filled with farming and hunting, Sigmund is relieved when Sable states he has no desire for power after 20 years of seclusion. Turning to Lifar to confirm her agreement, Sigmund accepts their proposal and asks the grandfather to teach him the contract process. Swirling magic begins to gather as Sable instructs him to proceed, and they finally begin the ritual. Carefully wrapping his magical energy around the older demon, Sigmund establishes the mystical connection. Trembling under the sheer weight of the spell, Sable groans as the raw power vastly exceeds his expectations. Completely unaware of the elder's internal struggle, Sigmund happily notes the smooth progress and casually asks if his panting guest is okay. Glowing with overflowing vitality and feeling years younger, Sable proudly declares himself a retainer while a mildly amused Sigmund politely nods. Stepping forward with firm determination, Lifar confidently announces she is ready to be next. Repeating the exact same process as before, Sigmund channels his swirling magic to envelop the young demon. Caught off guard by the intense surge of magical power, Lifar violently shudders under the overwhelming sensation. Blushing furiously as Lifar lets out suggestive moans, Sigmund desperately begs the beautiful lady to stop making such awkward noises. Breathing a sigh of relief as the contract safely completes, Sigmund watches Lifar marvel at her newly revitalized body. Clenching her fists with immense excitement, Lifar boasts to her grandfather that she feels strong enough to beat her own father. Validating his granddaughter's newfound strength, Sable explains that a future evolution would make her father completely obsolete, while Sigmund silently finds their family dynamic terrifying. Pitying the doomed father as Lifar vows to do her best, Sigmund refocuses his attention as the elder demon calls out to him once more. Kneeling with profound reverence, the Arashan demon Sable formally pledges to serve as Sigmund's loyal butler from this day forward. Swooping into a graceful curtsy beside her grandfather, Lifar flawlessly introduces herself as his newly appointed maid. Admitting this is the first time he has heard anything about them being maids and butlers, a smiling Sigmund welcomes his new retainers and looks forward to working together. Examining the strange item, Sable stammers in shock as he recognizes it as a legendary devil crawler's thread pouch. Casually confirming the creature hails from around the 30th floor, Sigmund explains he used alchemy to process its silken thread. Realizing the storage pouch itself is a rare magic bag, Sable stares in sheer disbelief that his master has mastered complex alchemy. Shrugging off the intense praise, Sigmund explains he simply imbued the bag with time-space magic for infinite space, though he still prefers his own dark magic shadow storage. Completely overwhelmed by this casual display of impossible power, Sable sighs that it would be vastly easier to list the feats his master cannot perform. Reflecting on their vastly different biologies, Sigmund casually notes that casting dark magic is generally restricted to spirit-type monsters. Shifting his focus, the vampire admits his alchemy failed to weave the threads into cloth and asks if they can be used for furniture instead. Clenching her fists with burning determination, a fired-up Lifar passionately begs him to leave the textile crafting to her. Boasting about her unique heritage, the spider demon proudly declares that absolutely nobody can rival an Arashan's cloth-spinning skills. Feeling deeply honored to handle materials considered a national treasure in the demon kingdom, Lifar eagerly accepts the massive responsibility. Testing the newly crafted furniture, Sigmund notes that the raw forest materials make for incredibly comfortable seating even without proper upholstery. Glowing with absolute delight, Lifar praises the amazingly relaxing restroom and cheerfully vows to live in this house forever. Appreciating her enthusiasm, Sigmund gently asks if a beautiful young woman like her wouldn't rather live independently or get married someday. Caught completely off guard by the suggestion, both demons freeze and stare at their master with blank, horrified expressions. Recovering from the sudden shock, Sable firmly reminds his master that they have already sworn a sacred oath to serve him for their entire lifetimes. Flashing a sly grin, the grandfather boldly offers Lifar as both a maid and a concubine, thoroughly flustering the poor girl. Glaring at the old man, Sigmund immediately shuts down the inappropriate joke and strictly warns him against harassing his own granddaughter. Blushing furiously, Lifar quietly curses under her breath as the sheer embarrassment of the situation washes over her. Pointing a firm finger, Sigmund warns that his strength and vigor skill makes those kinds of dangerous jokes strictly off the table. Refusing to back down entirely, Lifar clings to his arm and sincerely reaffirms her true desire to serve him for the rest of her life. Looking down with a melancholic gaze, the young maid confesses that her only remaining worry is her naturally short lifespan. Comparing her fragile mortal body to a flickering candle, Lifar laments the painful gap between herself and her immortal, ageless master. Processing this heavy truth, Sigmund solemnly realizes that no matter how close they become, death will eventually force them apart. Admitting how incredibly sad that fate would be, the vampire reveals he actually has a brilliant idea to solve their lifespan problem. Catching on instantly, Sable eagerly realizes that achieving a rare evolution might grant them the ageless skills necessary to serve an undead lord. Eyes shining with renewed hope, Lifar realizes that a successful evolution would allow her to stay by Sigmund's side forever. Overjoyed by the prospect of eternal companionship, the young demon blushes deeply and beams with absolute pure excitement. Grounding them back in reality, Sigmund scratches his head and reminds his retainers that they must desperately level up to trigger an evolution. Pointing toward the dangerous wilderness, the vampire cheerfully suggests that the high-level monsters in the nearby woods would be ideal hunting targets. Breaking into a cold sweat, Sable frantically reminds his reckless master that they are currently residing in the deadly abyssal forest. Trembling with fear, the old butler recounts how even the legendary former demon lord was immediately forced to retreat by the forest's overwhelming monsters. Bursting into hearty laughter, Sigmund assumes Sable is simply joking because every monster he fought below the 40th floor was terrifyingly strong. Staring in horrified silence, Sable completely freezes as the terrifying implications of his master's casual statements slowly sink in. Shaking intensely, the terrified grandfather stammers out a desperate question regarding Sigmund's history with the labyrinth of no return. Connecting the horrifying clues, Sable realizes with absolute dread that his master just referred to the labyrinth's monsters in the past tense. Yawning in absolute boredom, Sigmund casually confirms he completely cleared the labyrinth of the abyss and wiped it out of existence. Seeing their sheer panic, Sigmund offers to craft them custom safety equipment if they are too afraid to brave the forest alone. Pulling out a sleek weapon, the undead lord admits he has been looking for a good excuse to practice forging gear for other people. Leaning forward with genuine curiosity, he kindly asks the young maid to specify exactly what kind of weapon she prefers to wield. Stepping up to the dangerous challenge, Lifar confidently requests a set of light, single-handed swords to begin her dangerous new training. Holding her hands apart to demonstrate the size, Lifar explains that she previously fought using a dagger in each hand. Sigmund hums thoughtfully as he processes her weapon preference and plans his next move. Reaching into the void, the undead lord casts dark magic shadow storage to retrieve his hoarded materials. Pulling out incredibly rare black dragon fangs and claws, Sigmund casually declares he will forge them adequate weapons from the legendary monster parts. Lifar and Sable gasp in absolute disbelief at the casual display of such priceless, mythic materials. Noting their stunned expressions but choosing to ignore them, Sigmund silently decides to use the devil crawler threads to craft their new clothing. Setting the plan into motion, he tasks Lifar with using her Arashan skills to spin the raw threads into fine cloth. After discussing the optimal clothing designs with his retainers, Sigmund moves on to the next phase of his crafting project. Channeling his arcane power, he prepares to forge the armor by flawlessly combining magic, alchemy, and imbuement. Promising the finished armor will withstand any battle, he seamlessly uses his leather working skill to construct the durable boots. Shifting his focus to their armaments, the vampire lord prepares the raging furnace to forge their deadly new weapons. Utilizing his alchemy skills, Sigmund masterfully fuses a black dragon's claw with a small amount of raw adamantite. Placing the newly fused materials into the blazing furnace, he carefully heats the metal to the perfect forging temperature. Hammering the glowing hot metal with immense precision, he uses his smithing skill to forcefully shape it into a lethal sword. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Sigmund admires the flawless, sparkling blade he just created for Sable. Forging Lifar's daggers with equal mastery, he furiously hammers black dragon fangs and mithril together on the anvil. Presenting the newly crafted gear to his fully equipped retainers, Sigmund announces it is time for a final check in real combat. Decked out in their exquisite new armor and weapons, Sable and Lifar kneel respectfully before their incredibly generous master. Outlining the expedition, Sigmund explains they will hunt monsters, gather meat, and harvest medicinal herbs while heading toward the forest's center. Interrupting Sable's overly dramatic vow to protect him with his life, Sigmund bluntly states he will weaken the enemies first so they can land the finishing blows. Handing them more supplies, Sigmund quietly wonders if extravagance runs in their dramatic family while Sable weeps tears of frustration over his own perceived weakness. Casting the covert skill to shroud their presence, the undead lord signals the beginning of their hunting expedition. Moving silently through the dense foliage, the trio prowls the treacherous depths of the abyssal forest. Suddenly spotting their prey, a massive horned beast unaware of their presence, the group prepares to strike. Leaping from the shadows, Sigmund severely injures the beast before shouting for his retainers to finish it off. Drawing her gleaming new dragonfang daggers, a determined Lifar eagerly charges into the fray. Springing forward with incredible speed, Sable grips his newly forged sword and lunges at the weakened monster. Slashing through the air in perfect synchronization, the grandfather and granddaughter execute a devastating coordinated strike. Watching blood spray as the beast collapses, Sigmund marvels at their deep, instinctual understanding of combat techniques compared to his own reliance on sheer levels. Observing the monster vanish into a puff of smoke, the vampire lord admires Sable's soft yet powerful footwork and resolves to study their honed skills. Tossing a chunk of harvested meat into the air, Sigmund quickly stashes the loot into his shadow storage. Celebrating their smooth leveling progress and massive meat haul, the trio cheerfully moves deeper into the woods. Suddenly, massive, earth-shaking footsteps violently interrupt their celebration as a towering shadow approaches. Glancing up in sheer terror, the group spots a gargantuan, multi-armed monstrosity looming over the treetops. Crashing through the forest with overwhelming force, a monstrous tyrant Asura bear reveals its terrifying presence. Panicking at the sight of the legendary beast, Sable desperately screams for his master to run away. Roaring with deafening fury, the tyrant Asura bear swings its massive, razor-sharp claws directly at them. Gasping in horror, Sable and Lifar freeze as the lethal strike barrels toward their master. Remaining perfectly calm, Sigmund instantly summons swirling dark tendrils and casts dark magic shadow bindings to trap the towering beast. Restraining the paralyzed monster effortlessly, Sigmund casually points out its weak neck to his utterly dumbfounded retainers. Springing into action, Lifar tightly grips her daggers and nervously affirms her readiness. Slashing forward with blinding speed, Lifar smoothly decapitates her monstrous target in a single strike. Suddenly, a blinding burst of magical energy violently envelops Sable with a deafening crack. Emerging from the fading light, the elderly demon stands tall in an elegant uniform as a newly evolved higher ration butler type. Flexing his newly rejuvenated body, Sable proudly realizes he has finally broken past his level barrier and evolved. Clapping her hands with absolute delight, Lifar warmly congratulates her grandfather on his miraculous transformation. Sable proudly attributes his butler-type evolution to his ultimate loyalty, leaving Sigmund visibly sweating at the heavy devotion. Dropping to one knee in deep reverence, Sable gratefully reveals that serving his master has also granted him the extended life skill. Marveling at the abyssal forest's massive experience yield, Sable notes that even the legendary previous demon lord only reached level 90. Shortly after her grandfather's incredible success, a swirling aura of magical energy violently erupts around Lifar. Breaking through her own limits, Lifar joyfully announces her evolution into a higher ration mistress type. Standing confidently in her form-fitting new attire, Lifar showcases her stunning, alluring new evolution. Complementing her fantastic new look, Sigmund suddenly freezes as he awkwardly questions the specific implications of a mistress type. Quickly changing the subject, Sigmund points out how perfectly their armor fits and suggests they finally head home for the day. Strolling back through the dense woodland, Sigmund curiously asks his retainers how far they are from the demon kingdom. Sable promptly explains that the demon lord's kingdom is a 4-day trek, while a human settlement is only 3 days away. Eager to restock on spices, Sigmund cheerfully declares that a 3-day shopping trip to the human town sounds like a fantastic idea. Stepping in to address any financial concerns, Sable assures his master that his hoarded wealth easily rivals the highest demon nobles. Greatly relieved by his massive fortune, Sigmund excitedly plans to buy absolutely anything he wants without a single worry. Looking toward the future, the vampire lord firmly states that both retainers must soon become capable of roaming the dangerous forest alone. Bursting with unwavering dedication, the newly evolved grandfather and granddaughter passionately swear to do their absolute best. Finally returning to the quiet safety of his manor, an exhausted Sigmund collapses onto his bed with a heavy sigh. Staring up at the dark ceiling, he reflects on his 20 years of isolation and admits it feels strange having roommates. Suddenly, a soft, hesitant knock at his bedroom door completely startles the resting vampire lord. As the heavy door slowly creaks open, a deeply blushing and squirming Lifar nervously peeks into his room. Fidgeting outside the door in the middle of the night, Lifar startles Sigmund when he asks why she is there. Blushing heavily, the flustered maid stammers out that she has come to serve him for the night. Swiftly untying her sash, the young Arashan smoothly lets her garments slide off her shoulders. Dropping her robe entirely to the floor, an exposed Lifar nervously calls out her master's name. Reacting with blinding speed, Sigmund instantly throws a heavy blanket over her bare form to cover her up. Utterly bewildered by the sudden rejection, Lifar peeks out from under the thick fabric with a confused expression. Blushing furiously, Sigmund abruptly declares he is going to sleep and desperately orders her to return to her room. Slamming the heavy door shut, the panicked vampire lord leaves a baffled Lifar standing alone in the hallway. Meanwhile, the distant demon kingdom's ominous spires rest silently beneath the dark night sky. Inside a dimly lit meeting room, Demon King Vandit asks his subordinates for an update on their current affairs. A subordinate reports that despite their efforts to repair relations, everything is proceeding normally except for the Holy Land. General Igris grimly explains that Jurad still considers magic folk evil and actively calls for their divine extermination. Sighing in deep frustration, Vandit laments that no other country will listen and wishes their enemies were more reasonable. Civil servant Abaddon suggests that recruiting the legendary Sir Sable would greatly benefit their diplomatic standing. Surprised by the mention of his father's former retainer, Vandit notes the veteran demon should be peacefully retired. Acknowledging Sable's prestigious character, the Demon King orders his subordinates to contact the retired warrior for an endorsement. Concluding the tense meeting, Vandit strictly reminds his council not to be careless with their fragile trade agreements. Shifting back to the tranquil abyssal forest, a bright morning sun shines as Sigmund happily admires the weather. Tilling the rich soil effortlessly, the tireless undead lord notes his immortal body makes it difficult to stop working. Pausing his intense agricultural labor, Sigmund reflects on his solitude while Sable and Lifar are out running errands. Surveying the massive cleared land, the vampire wonders if he made the farm too large while killing time. Visualizing a bountiful harvest, Sigmund realizes this field could cultivate enough wheat and grapes to produce alcohol. Remembering the lack of alcohol variety, he concludes that brewing his own drinks is the best option. Acknowledging the difficulty of farming alone, he sighs over the impossibility of hiring humans in this deadly forest. Striking upon a brilliant idea, Sigmund remembers reading about autonomous mechanical workers in one of Sable's magical books. Deciding to postpone the automaton project, he resolves to venture into the forest and search for wild grapevines. Casting a protective barrier around the manor, Sigmund eyes he might easily find grapes near the apples. Leaping with incredible agility, the vampire lord instantly activates his mist form skill to travel much faster. Transforming into swirling dark vapor, Sigmund effortlessly glides high above the dense, lush forest canopy. Spotting something interesting below, the misty black cloud rapidly descends back toward the vibrant woodland floor. Reforming his physical body, Sigmund happily discovers a massive, sprawling cluster of wild grapes in the brush. Swiping a plump grape directly from the vine, he tosses the fresh fruit into his mouth to test it. Chewing the sweet fruit with satisfaction, he proudly praises the fantastic natural bounty of the abyssal forest. Eagerly harvesting the ripe clusters, the undead lord uses his shadow storage skill to instantly stash his haul. Returning to his quiet manor, Sigmund settles down to read about automata while patiently awaiting his retainer's arrival. Bursting through the front door a short while later, Sable and Lifar cheerfully announce their safe return home. Welcoming them back warmly, Sigmund immediately offers to brew his exhausted servants a fresh pot of tea. Pouring the steaming tea into delicate cups, the vampire lord listens as Sable officially requests to give his report. Gesturing toward the wooden table with a calm demeanor, Sigmund kindly instructs the wary demons to sit down. Settling into his chair, Sable formally reports that they successfully acquired the requested crop seeds and magical books. Reporting on their successful shopping trip, the retainers present Sigmund with freshly bought vegetable saplings, daily necessities, spices, and alcohol. Beaming with gratitude, Sigmund warmly thanks the two demons and notes that their supplies will help immensely. Responding to Sable's curiosity about his next project, the vampire lord explains his plan to build automata for the manor and golems for the fields. Nodding in agreement, the old butler praises the idea because the forest's thick magic will allow the constructs to serve for a very long time. Delving into magical theory, Sable explains that casting Create Golem generates a vital core that acts as the construct's heart until destroyed. Understanding that normal golems operate on limited magic batteries unlike infinitely powered dungeon golems, Sigmund takes mental notes. Embracing the spirit of trial and error, the undead lord confidently decides they should just jump in and try making one. Throwing his hands up with overwhelming excitement, Sigmund suddenly declares he is also going to brew some alcohol. Springing into action, the trio simultaneously begins crafting magical golem parts alongside new alcohol-making instruments. Holding a sturdy wooden block, Sigmund turns to his retainers and asks which trees would be best for constructing wood golems. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, Sable advises that trees grown in the densest concentrations of magic will likely yield the sturdiest materials. Connecting the dots, Sigmund casually realizes the thickest magic is located exactly where the destroyed labyrinth of the abyss used to stand. Ignoring Sable's nervous sweat drop over his terrifyingly casual attitude, Sigmund happily announces they will harvest their trees from the fallen dungeon's ruins. Unleashing his immense physical power, the vampire lord effortlessly chops and harvests massive magical logs at blinding speeds. Carving the dense wood with expert precision, he crafts spherical joints and sets the golem's towering height to roughly 2 meters for heavy labor. Finalizing the intricate internal structure, Sigmund carefully embeds processed magic stones to serve as the construct's batteries and sensory organs. Stepping back to admire the fully assembled wooden frame, an eager Sigmund declares it is time to bring the giant to life. Channeling his arcane energy, the undead lord extends his hand and powerfully casts the Create Golem spell. Instantly responding to the command, a brilliant burst of magical light forcefully envelops the massive wooden construct. Slipping on a pair of specialized appraisal glasses, Sigmund steps closer to closely inspect his newly awakened creation. A glowing status screen appears, revealing the level 0 wood golem surprisingly possesses superhuman strength and martial arts. While Sigmund softly chuckles that martial arts might be unnecessary, a deeply impressed Sable claps and praises the magnificent creation. Curious about pushing the construct's limits, Sigmund asks his butler if a golem is capable of evolving once it receives a proper name. Sable confirms they can indeed evolve, though he warns that naming a monster typically consumes a significant amount of the master's magic. Completely unbothered by the magical cost, Sigmund confidently notes he survived naming himself as a weak ghost and will be perfectly fine now. Focusing his immense magical power, Sigmund extends a glowing hand toward the silent wooden giant standing before him. Shrouding the heavy construct in a blinding, pulsating aura, Sigmund officially bestows upon it the grand name Kugunok. A newly updated status screen materializes, revealing Kugunok has instantly leveled up and acquired the rare plant magic skill. Smiling brightly at his newly evolved servant, Sigmund warmly welcomes Kugunok to the household and eagerly tells the giant he'll be counting on him. Flexing its massive wooden body, the towering golem lets out a deep, resonant hum to faithfully acknowledge its master's command. Sigmund asks Sable and Lifar to take Kugunok into the nearby forest to level him up, and Sable bows while promising to train the golem to max level with great haste. Meanwhile, Sigmund decides to stay behind and begin working on crafting a new indoor automaton. Planning to create a maid automaton to handle chores inside the manor, he notes it must not feel out of place standing beside Lifar. Using demonic steel, he begins adjusting the skeleton to resemble a human frame that perfectly matches Lifar's proportions. Scrubbing the demon bones clean, he relies on his past experience as a skeleton to confidently construct the intricate bone structure. Pondering his next step, Sigmund wonders if he can use alchemy and demon tendons to successfully weave synthetic muscles. Staring at the incomplete skull, he realizes something is still lacking and decides to make the automaton's mouth movable as well. Meanwhile, in the distant demon kingdom, a shocked official reports that the retired veteran Sable has completely gone missing. The panicked subordinate explains that investigators visited Sable's retirement residence only to find it completely vacant. Pondering the mystery, an official mutters that searching the dangerous northern outskirts near the abyssal forest will be extremely difficult. A superior notes that Sable is uniquely rational for a strength-obsessed demon, having openly voiced his opinions even to the absolute power of the former demon king. Expressing deep personal concern, King Vandit asks if there is any way to confirm the safety of the man who practically raised him. Suddenly, an official bursts through the heavy meeting room doors, loudly apologizing for interrupting the tense discussion. Startled by the sudden intrusion, the attendees demand to know what the frantic Master Abaddon is trying to report. Catching his breath, Abaddon urgently reveals they just received reports that Sable has been sighted alive inside the city. Back at the manor, a pleased Sigmund notes that Kugunoka's leveling expedition with the retainers went incredibly smoothly. Eager to test the results, the undead lord instructs his towering wooden golem to try evolving right away. Responding to the command, the massive golem glows brightly as it begins its magical transformation. Noting that golems require their master's explicit command to evolve, Sigmund silently wonders if Kugunoka's slight charm stems from his own magical influence. Clapping her hands in absolute delight, Lifar cheers the giant construct on as it fully embraces its new form. Reviewing the updated status screen, Sigmund praises the Highwood Golem for acquiring impressive new skills like fire magic resistance. Thanking Sable and Lifar for their hard work, Sigmund smiles as the blushing demons insist it was only natural and helped them level up too. Admitting his automaton project has been rough, the vampire asks Lifar for her design opinions since she will be working directly alongside the new maid. Startled by the request, Lifar quickly blurts out that a cute girl design would be absolutely perfect. Realizing how embarrassing her sudden outburst sounded, the young Arashan blushes furiously and nervously looks away. Grinning warmly at her flustered reaction, Sigmund agrees that a doll meant to be a maid should definitely look like a cute girl. Relieved by his gentle teasing, Lefar eagerly agrees to help give him pointers on how to refine the automaton's design. Anticipating future evolutions, Sigmund decides to craft synthetic skin and hair, prompting Lefar to volunteer to spin the required threads. To create a natural texture, Sigmund suggests synthesizing a high-quality base material using actual monster skin. Caught slightly off guard, Sable suddenly proposes using sturdy tissue from the black dragon's wings to ensure the highest quality. Adding to the strategy, Lefar thoughtfully suggests that using reptile-type demon materials would be a perfect match for the dragon tissue. Deeply impressed by her knowledge, Sigmund praises Lefar for thoroughly studying material synthesis and blending. Blushing sweetly, the humble maid quietly admits she simply wanted to be of some help to her beloved master. Touched by her earnest dedication, Sigmund silently marvels at how incredibly cute his young retainer is acting. Pulling out rare assassin snake and shine lizard hides, Sigmund prepares to magically fuse them with the dragon tissue. Channeling his arcane energy, the undead lord activates his alchemy skill to violently boil and combine the rare materials. The glowing magical reaction successfully yields two distinct batches of synthetic skin fabric, one dark and one light. Inspecting the results, Sigmund notes the dark fabric grants covert skills while the light grants regeneration, leaving him unsure which to choose. Staring blankly at her pondering master, Lefar politely interrupts to offer a remarkably simple solution. Pointing out their abundance of materials and time, she brightly suggests simply making two automata instead of limiting themselves to just one. Confirming their master's logic, a retainer agrees that two automata are a perfectly reasonable number considering the sheer size of the sprawling mansion. Shifting the focus to their previous creation, Sigmund proudly notes that Kugunoka's level has steadily increased while the retainers were hard at work. Thanking Sable for his dedicated assistance, the undead lord admits that something about the massive golem's recent behavior strikes him as incredibly odd. Turning his attention to the towering wooden construct, Sigmund gently asks what is bothering Kugunok as the golem urgently taps its wooden fingers. Realizing the giant is already prepared for another evolution, Sigmund quickly grants his permission for the golem to begin its transformation. As the golem continues to groan without evolving, a puzzled Sigmund hums thoughtfully and wonders if the construct needs something specific from him first. Yielding to the giant's silent demands, the vampire lord calmly activates his shadow storage to retrieve a few potential evolution materials. Tossing various items into the air, Sigmund casually asks if the golem wants them as Kugunok eagerly grunts in response. Offering a glowing magic stone and a solid mithril ingot, the master presents the rare materials to his expectant servant. Suddenly reacting to the powerful items, the massive golem lets out a deep, resonant rumble as it eagerly absorbs the rare metals. A digital prompt materializes instantly, proudly displaying Kugunoka's miraculous evolution into a level 1 supreme golem. Clapping in sheer awe, Sable deduces that the increasingly intelligent golem specifically chose this new form out of a deep desire to be vastly more useful to its master. Gazing proudly at his newly upgraded supreme golem, Sigmund confidently declares that Kugunok can now effortlessly manage the entire mansion grounds single-handedly. Fired up by the golem's impressive growth, an inspired Lefar firmly resolves to push her own limits and grow significantly stronger as well. Shifting his complete focus back to his personal projects, Sigmund isolates himself to passionately work on assembling the delicate automata. Working with absolute precision, the undead lord meticulously snaps perfectly crafted demonic bones and joints into place. Carefully slotting two brilliant red gems into the skull, he secures the sparkling stones to serve as the mechanical doll's lifeless pupils. Stepping back to admire his intricate handiwork, Sigmund successfully finishes constructing the terrifyingly realistic metallic skeletons. Meanwhile, a highly focused Lefar works her Arashan magic to flawlessly weave and sew a pair of elegant maid dresses. Returning to the workshop, Sigmund carefully drapes the magically synthesized skin over the cold mechanical frames. Slipping the freshly tailored maid dresses onto the inert bodies, the master swiftly fully clothes his newest creations. Wiping imaginary sweat from his brow, a deeply satisfied Sigmund triumphantly declares that the twin automata are finally complete. Standing perfectly still in the center of the room, the two stunningly beautiful mechanical maids wait silently for their master's command. Raising his glowing hand toward the lifeless dolls, the undead lord focuses a massive surge of pure magical energy. Channeling his overwhelming power into the empty vessels, Sigmund fiercely chants the Create Golem spell to breathe life into the machines. A blinding burst of arcane light violently erupts through the workshop as the spell successfully binds to the synthetic bodies. Humming to life with a soft mechanical whir, the twin maids slowly open their striking red eyes and gaze directly at their creator. Bestowing identities upon his new servants, Sigmund officially names the light-haired maid Bran and the dark-haired maid Naul. Bowing gracefully in perfect synchronization, Bran and Naul formally introduce themselves as living dolls entirely dedicated to fulfilling his every command. Staring in utter disbelief at the articulate constructs, a completely flabbergasted Lifar screams in shock that the dolls can actually speak. While Lifar continues to panic over their impossible sentience, a deeply impressed Sable simply chuckles and praises his master's unparalleled genius. Quickly recovering from her initial shock, a beaming Lifar excitedly welcomes the twin maids to the team and looks forward to working together. Deep within the abyssal forest, a legendary labyrinth of no return stands surrounded by ferocious, rampant magic creatures. Amidst the deadly, untamed wilderness, a single, elegant manor stands as a quiet sanctuary. Standing proudly before the massive estate, Sigmund cheerfully declares that this incredible manor is his personal home. Strolling through his sprawling property, the undead lord surveys the vast, peaceful grounds he has cultivated. Plunging his tools into the rich earth, he works the massive fields with effortless, untiring strength. Meanwhile, Lifar diligently trains the newly created automata, Bran and Naul, helping them level up while teaching them essential housework. Inspecting the thriving orchard, Sigmund happily notes that the heavily laden fruit trees are growing beautifully. Cheering alongside the massive golem Kugunok, the vampire lord eagerly decides to expand their facilities even further to accommodate the booming harvest. Pointing out their recent progress, he admires the fully constructed woodworking shop and Lifar's dedicated sewing shed. With the smithing shed and storage already completed, Sigmund sets his sights on building a massive water wheel and an alcohol distillery. Realizing the immense scale of his ambitious projects, he enthusiastically declares that they must also expand the main waterway. Shaping the terrain with powerful earth magic, Sigmund lays a solid foundation before calling upon Kugunok to take the next step. Stepping heavily onto the fresh soil, the towering supreme golem forcefully activates its mystical plant magic. Thick, sturdy roots and massive wooden beams violently burst from the earth to instantly form the structure's framework. Praising the giant's flawless execution, Sigmund cheers and enthusiastically thanks Kugunok for the incredible assistance. Marveling at the golem's versatility, the master notes that Kugunok's unique plant magic is equally perfect for both rapid crop growth and heavy construction. Recognizing the incredible utility of the spell, Sigmund deduces that only a former wood golem could master such rapid, healthy botanical manipulation. Fueled entirely by Sigmund's boundless magical supply and the forest's dense energy, the tireless golem continuously produces rapid, mouth-watering harvests. Deeply impressed by Kugunok's unmatched efficiency, the undead lord decides to take his automation plans a step further. Introducing his newest creation, Sigmund reveals he built a second, smaller wood golem named Tom because he completely ran out of clever naming ideas. Utilizing a much smaller and more agile build, Tom flawlessly executes delicate woodworking tasks to perfectly complement Kugunok's heavy lifting. Backed by the combined tireless efforts of his golems and his loyal butler Sable, Sigmund watches the massive construction projects proceed without a single hitch. Working in perfect synchronization, the dedicated team rapidly assembles the heavy wooden beams and complex machinery. Echoing through the dense forest, the rhythmic, heavy pounding of mallets signals the steady completion of the new structures. Standing back to admire their handiwork, the crew successfully erects the sturdy wooden framework of the new facility. Suddenly pausing his work, Sigmund realizes his powerful resistance skills have made him completely oblivious to the region's actual climate. Turning to his knowledgeable butler for answers, Sigmund asks about the weather and learns that it is currently the middle of autumn. Warning his master of the harsh impending winter, Sable explains that the temperature will soon plummet and heavy snow will inevitably blanket the area. Processing the chilling forecast, Sigmund hums thoughtfully as he immediately begins to strategize a winter survival plan. Knowing the enchanted manor will remain perfectly warm, the undead lord resolves to quickly stockpile proper winter necessities to protect his mortal retainers. Dismissing Sable's polite concerns about being a burden, Sigmund cheerfully points out that his golems handle all the heavy fieldwork, leaving him plenty of free time. Suddenly interrupting the conversation, a highly energetic Lifar sprints toward them and loudly calls out for her master. Bursting with excitement, the young maid proudly announces that the newly grown orchard fruits are finally perfectly ripe and ready to eat. Eagerly biting into the fresh harvest, the group happily munches on the crisp, incredibly delicious fruits. Noting Lifar's absolute delight, Sigmund deduces the unmatched flavor comes from the forest's dense magical soil and Kugunoka's specialized cultivation. Blushing deeply as she devours a juicy peach, Lifar passionately declares she has never tasted anything with such an exquisite, perfect sweetness. Gazing up at her master with hopeful eyes, the young Arashan shyly begs him to plant even more of the incredible peach trees. Amused by her sheer gluttony, Sigmund warmly smiles and easily agrees to her sweet request. Confident that his vast shadow storage will perfectly preserve the endless bounty of meat and produce, Sigmund happily decides it is always better to have a massive surplus. Flashing forward a full month after breaking ground, Sigmund proudly stands before his fully operational, beautifully crafted alcohol distillery. Sigmund dramatically declares that from today onwards, everyone will be making wine. The entire household, including the massive golems and automata, cheers enthusiastically at the grand announcement. Armed with empty woven baskets, the eager group happily charges forward to begin their massive harvest. Pointing toward the sprawling vineyard, Sigmund rallies his loyal retainers to go out and pick some fresh grapes. Working with incredible magical efficiency, the towering golem Kugunok effortlessly strips entire vines of their plump fruit. Assisting the gentle giant, the smaller golem Tom and the twin automata quickly gather the falling grapes into large wooden baskets. Carrying a towering stack of overflowing baskets, Sable proves his demonic strength while Lifar eagerly matches his rapid pace. Back at the manor, Sigmund instructs the group that they will use exactly half of their massive harvest completely whole. Peeling a single grape as an example, he explains the other half will undergo the arduous process of having their skins and seeds removed. Noting his retainer's intense motivation, Sigmund playfully asks if they rarely had the chance to drink alcohol in the past. Sable solemnly admits that as an advisor to the former Demon King, he only drank the rare delicacy once a year at special events. Teasing the old man for always looking so serious, Sigmund eagerly declares it is time to start distilling the best wine they possibly can. Utilizing his advanced gravity magic, the undead lord effortlessly crushes the whole grapes while simultaneously purifying the skinned batch. Working in perfect harmony, the entire household carefully funnels the undiluted liquid into massive wooden casks to begin fermentation. Staring proudly at the lined barrels, Sigmund explains he used enchanting to ensure the building maintains the perfect temperature and humidity for aging. Clasping his hands together, the vampire lord cheerfully announces that all they have to do now is patiently wait for it to be ready. Suddenly realizing a critical flaw in their plan, Sigmund notes they still need glass bottles and corks, which the nearby town does not produce. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, Sable recalls that cork is actually cultivated within the territory of the Demon Kingdom's Prime Minister. Meanwhile, far away in the Demon Kingdom, Prime Minister Demoris violently sneezes just as Lifar confirms they can buy the cork from his lands. Stepping up to the task, Sable volunteers to fetch the cork and asks his master if he should purchase finished glass bottles as well. Declining the helpful offer, Sigmund instructs his butler to simply buy raw glass so he can personally craft the bottles himself. Scratching his head with a fond smile, the undead lord admits he enjoys being meticulous and wants to forge fittingly special bottles for their grand occasion. Bursting with anticipation, Lifar declares she is getting more excited by the minute, though Sigmund laughs and reminds her they don't even know if it tastes good yet. Suddenly shifting his gaze to the silent automata, Sigmund laments that Blanc and Noir currently lack any sense of taste to enjoy their hard work. Acknowledging that their mechanical species doesn't need to eat, he sympathetically notes it would probably be incredibly difficult for them to ever acquire the sense. Surprising his master, Sable reveals that throughout the Demon Kingdom's long history, there have actually been cases of constructs gaining taste through continuous evolution. Instantly reacting to the revelation, the twin automata forcefully interrupt the conversation and loudly call out to their master. Staring with absolute, unblinking determination, Blanc and Noir declare they are immediately going out to raise their levels. Watching the highly motivated mechanical maid storm off, a slightly bewildered Sigmund realizes they must have been incredibly envious of the upcoming feast. A harsh, freezing winter officially falls upon the treacherous depths of the abyssal forest. The sprawling grounds surrounding Sigmund's elegant manor are completely buried beneath a thick blanket of heavy snow. The heavily constructed golems dutifully tend to the massive fields since they feel no bitter cold. Safely hibernating inside the warm manor, Lifar cheerfully announces that preparations for dinner are complete. Sitting comfortably around the grand dining table, Sigmund excitedly prepares to enjoy the massive feast. Proudly introducing the meal, Lifar happily announces that Blanc and Noir prepared today's feast entirely alone. Chuckling at the heartwarming scene, Sigmund playfully notes Lifar seems prouder than her mechanical students. Raising his utensils with immense enthusiasm, the undead lord eagerly digs into the spectacular meal. Tossing a perfectly cooked chunk of meat into his mouth, he happily munches on the delicious food. Swallowing the savory bite with a satisfied gulp, Sigmund takes a moment to process the flavors. Slamming his hands on the table with delight, the vampire lord loudly praises the spectacular taste. Relieved by his enthusiastic approval, a beaming Lifar giggles softly while the quiet automata watch. Raising a thumb, Sigmund congratulates the twin maids and praises their newfound mastery of complex spices. Acknowledging the high praise, the living dolls gracefully curtsy together in perfect harmony. Smiling warmly at the beautiful scene, Sigmund silently appreciates the comforting warmth filling his manor. Gathering the dirty dishes with flawless efficiency, Blanc and Noir silently clear the table. Suddenly remembering a lingering thought, Sigmund turns his attention toward his knowledgeable butler Sable. Offering his grinning retainers a taste, Sigmund asks Sable for more information regarding the forest's outskirts. Charting the geography, Sable explains the northwestern mountains lead to the Demon Kingdom while heading west reaches humans. Nodding as he visualizes the northwestern regions, Sigmund curiously asks what lies beyond the southwestern borders. Admitting his limited knowledge, Sable confesses he has only read historical books about the mysterious eastern lands. Tracing imaginary lines, Sable describes southern grassy plains giving way to massive eastern deserts and an ocean. Sigmund asks about claims to the land, and Sable notes human nations avoid expanding eastward due to nearby threats. Leaning forward with a serious expression, Sable warns his master of a dangerous outlier called the Holy Nation of Jarad. Delving into their ideology, the veteran demon explains Jarad believes all magic folk are evil and seeks to purge them. Highlighting extreme tension, Sable notes Jarad remains determined to violently invade despite human ceasefires with the Demon King. Analyzing the situation, the former advisor warns Jarad's aggressive actions could force the Demon Kingdom back into war. Processing the heavy political briefing, Sigmund hums thoughtfully as he weighs potential threats to his sanctuary. Summarizing the dire situation, the undead lord bluntly concludes the Holy Nation is a very bothersome problem. Shifting focus, Sigmund asks what the fanatical nation intends to do with the peaceful eastern nomads. Grimly predicting their dark fate, Sable states the nomads will be enslaved as a mere labor force. Shocked by the cruelty, Sigmund notes the nomads are human, but Sable explains Jarad persecutes those married to beastkin. Staring at his butler in sheer disbelief, Sigmund quietly repeats the word persecution as the reality sinks in. Deeply unsettled by the horrific human rights violations, the undead lord admits the tragic topic disgusts him. Misinterpreting his master's frustration, Sable smoothly asks if Sigmund would like him to violently overthrow the Holy Nation. Completely caught off guard by the casual offer of total annihilation, Sigmund freezes in absolute astonishment. Frantically waving his hands, a panicked Sigmund desperately clarifies that starting a massive war is not his goal. Sighing deeply, the vampire lord admits having the peaceful plains next door violently invaded sounds equally awful. Firmly prioritizing a peaceful life, Sigmund notes his retainer's terrifying warlike nature explains human fear of magic folk. Thinking furiously to protect his quiet life, the undead lord resolves to devise a completely non-violent countermeasure. A dark, quiet scene establishes the freezing winter setting of the secluded manor. Dropping onto his soft bed, Sigmund reflects on his ghostly origins and concludes that remaining in the forest was his best choice. Sinking into the mattress, the undead lord exhales a deep, exhausted sigh. Gratefully embracing his comfortable new life, he remembers his miserable early days of endlessly crawling through a damp dungeon. Counting his current blessings, he praises his beautiful maid just as Lifar suddenly calls his name. Jolting up in sheer panic, a deeply startled Sigmund frantically asks when she sneaked into his room. Standing calmly in the doorway, Lifar explains she just walked in while he was entirely lost in his thoughts. Glaring softly at her nervous master, the Irashan demands to know why he continually runs away when she visits his room at night. Blushing heavily, Sigmund stammers about his past life's morals and insists such intimacy belongs only to a very special partner. Gazing up with incredibly vulnerable eyes, Lifar softly asks if she cannot be that special someone to him. A tense, heavy silence completely fills the quiet, dimly lit bedroom. Mentally cursing his own hesitation, Sigmund realizes Lifar is offering herself with absolute sincerity and deep thought. As Lifar gently calls his name again, the vampire lord remembers her vow to serve him with everything she possesses. Questioning his own worthiness, Sigmund admits he finds her overwhelmingly adorable and fears he could never be good enough for her. Remembering her unwavering support, he acknowledges she is the only woman in his life and his greatest teacher in this strange world. Surrendering entirely to his genuine feelings, the undead lord softly admits that she is already plenty special to him. Reaching out gently, he calls Lifa's name with a newfound, profound tenderness. Blushing furiously, Sigmund nervously begs the young maid not to laugh since this is his very first time. Giggling warmly, Lifa flashes a bright, affectionate smile and promises she will not laugh at him. Grumbling in playful embarrassment, Sigmund quickly points out that she is already laughing. Morning birds chirp brightly outside the frost-covered manor windows. A peaceful morning light bathes the quiet, snow-dusted estate. Moving with renewed energy, Sigmund quickly pulls a fresh shirt over his head to dress for the new day. Stepping outside into the freezing weather, the undead lord happily notes that his winter olives are growing beautifully. Praising his tireless golem crew, Sigmund confirms he can safely leave the difficult farming work entirely in Kugunoka's massive hands. Utilizing his newly freed schedule, the vampire lord decides to dedicate his time to pressing olive oil and crafting extra tableware. Admiring the thriving winter vegetables, Sigmund celebrates his limitless supply of clear river water and abundant forest meat. Aiming for complete self-sufficiency, he firmly resolves never to return to his desperate days of sucking demon blood for survival. Gathering raw clay from the mountains, he violently burns demon bones to create a specialized crafting mixture. Channeling his earth magic, he expertly kneads the thick, magical clay into perfect, delicate shapes. Carefully baking the molds with highly controlled fire magic, Sigmund proudly finishes a flawless set of bone china. Expanding his vast collection, he crafts wooden tableware alongside elegant silver pieces forged from freshly unearthed mine minerals. Striking a rich vein with his pickaxe, he realizes the magic-dense forest yields rare video game-like drops such as mithril and adamantite. Stepping into the workshop, Lifa politely announces that a fresh lunch is finally ready to be eaten. Following his maid inside, Sigmund quietly thanks Lifa and Sable for coming to live with him and transforming his quiet life. Glancing out the window, he watches Kugunok and Tom working tirelessly to effortlessly maintain the massive estate. Hearing that Blanc and Noir prepared sautéed monster meat, Sigmund smiles at how completely his robotic maids have integrated into the household. Marveling at his vibrant, lively manner, the undead lord happily reflects on how much he has built from absolute nothingness. Staring out over the snow-covered grounds, he considers the highly dangerous reputation of the dreaded abyssal forest. Smiling softly, Sigmund firmly declares that this terrifying wilderness has become a personal paradise he will protect at any cost. A quiet, scenic view of the sprawling town establishes the bustling environment. A cloaked demon holding a portrait asks a local shopkeeper for any information regarding the missing veteran. Confirming the sighting, the merchant nods and mentions that the old man indeed stopped by on a shopping errand. Apologizing for his lack of details, the shopkeeper admits he has no idea which direction the old man went afterward, prompting the investigator to politely thank him. Walking away from the store, the investigator sighs in deep frustration over how incredibly difficult finding Sable is proving to be. Suddenly, an eager subordinate sprints down the crowded street and loudly calls out to Master Abaddon. Turning to his panting subordinate, Abaddon quickly demands a report, but the soldier hesitantly admits their leads remain cold despite gathering many eyewitnesses. The perplexed soldier explains that the targets bought strange items like plant seeds and soil before vanishing entirely without a trace. Shocked by the bizarre purchases, Abaddon wonders why an exemplary magic folk would buy supplies that make it seem like he is simply opening a farm. Brushing off the confusing revelation, Abaddon refocuses his attention as a dark bird suddenly flutters past him. Devising a new strategy, the master orders his men to search friendly human cities while he personally commands his familiar to scout the distant outskirts. Meanwhile, back at the peaceful manor, Sable feels a sudden chill and quickly brushes it off when his master asks if something is wrong. Accepting the butler's reassurances, Sigmund casually turns his attention back to the strange mechanical device he is actively assembling. Intricate magical runes glow brightly on the surface of the carefully constructed alarm system. Responding to his butler's curiosity, the undead lord explains that the alarm will instantly alert them if any hostile forces from the Holy Nation attempt to cross their borders. Agreeing with the strategic measure, Sable notes that since the golems are completely occupied with farm work, establishing a dedicated self-defense militia would be incredibly helpful. Flashing a bright smile, Sigmund excitedly declares that he knows the perfect candidate to single-handedly defend their precious forest. Deep within the freezing, snow-covered wilderness, the massive, multi-armed tyrant Asura bear prowls through the thick brush. Ripping into its fresh prey, the gargantuan beast savagely devours the bloody meat with razor-sharp teeth. Crunching heavily through the pristine snow, Sigmund boldly steps directly into the terrifying monster's clearing. Raising a confident hand, the vampire lord casually shouts to grab the towering beast's attention. Reacting instantly to the intrusion, the furious monster roars just as swirling dark magic violently erupts from Sigmund's feet. Unfazed by the magical display, the enraged tyrant Asura bear lunges forward with a deafening, blood-curdling roar. Reacting with blinding speed, Sigmund effortlessly summons thick, shadow-infused bindings to strike the charging beast. The powerful dark tendrils instantly wrap around the massive bear, violently slamming it completely into the frozen earth. Completely immobilized by the overwhelming magical restraints, the helpless monster growls in deep frustration. Staring down at his captured prey, the undead lord flashes a wide, terrifyingly confident grin. Recognizing its master's absolute superiority, the giant bear rolls onto its back in complete submission, prompting a satisfied nod from Sigmund. Kneeling beside the defeated creature, Sigmund kindly asks if it wishes to become one of his loyal followers. Channeling a massive surge of naming magic, the master formally bestows the grand title of Asura upon the giant beast. Giving the newly evolved monster its first command, Sigmund strictly orders Asura to ruthlessly patrol the borders protecting their peaceful lands. Trudging through the heavy snow together, the loyal bear happily crunches on a fresh snack provided by its new master. Walking side by side, the unlikely pair heads deeper into the dense, freezing wilderness. Outlining his strategic plan, Sigmund excitedly declares they must massively power up Asura's level so no Holy Nation intruders can ever harm him. Pumping its massive fists into the air, the fired-up bear unleashes a triumphant roar of absolute agreement. Quickly tempering the beast's excitement, Sigmund sternly adds that they must also undergo strict behavioral training to avoid accidentally crushing innocent travelers. Pausing their trek, the master and his new guardian silently gaze out over a breathtaking, snow-covered valley. Suddenly springing into action, the duo effortlessly obliterates a group of wild monsters, leaving behind nothing but vanishing puffs of smoke. Continuing their brutal leveling spree, Asura flawlessly crushes yet another unfortunate target. Pausing mid-hunt, the giant bear suddenly points its massive claw toward a distant anomaly, prompting a curious Sigmund to ask what it has found. Checking Asura's newly acquired skills, Sigmund realizes the giant bear has learned a devastating technique called Scorching Breath. Curious about the monster's latent power, the undead lord enthusiastically encourages Asura to try the new ability out. Roaring fiercely, the towering beast unleashes a massive, concentrated beam of scorching breath across the snowy clearing. The apocalyptic wave of pure fire instantly obliterates the landscape and violently incinerates the surrounding trees. Staring at the blazing destruction in absolute disbelief, a completely horrified Sigmund stutters in sheer panic. Springing into action, the vampire lord desperately casts a water magic whip to douse the raging inferno before it spreads. As thick steam billows from the scorched earth, a frantic Sigmund strictly forbids Asura from ever using that skill outside of dire emergencies. Reviewing the great tyrant Asura bear's updated status screen, the exhausted master decides to conclude their intense combat training for the day. Sitting the massive beast down, Sigmund pivots to etiquette lessons and prepares to teach Asura how to peacefully behave around humans. Meanwhile, far away in a grand palace, a heavy fist furiously slams down onto a stone table. Screaming in blinding rage, a fanatic leader demands to know why his mighty forces cannot capture the eastern grasslands. Glaring down from his opulent throne, divine ruler Bakul of the holy nation of Jirad radiates pure, unrestrained fury. A kneeling commander grimly reports that an imposing monster has claimed the territory, completely preventing their troops from passing through. Trembling violently under their ruler's murderous gaze, the terrified soldiers brace themselves for the inevitable explosive backlash. Arrogantly declaring their troops to be descendants of God, the raving lunatic orders his men to simply kill the imposing demon. A dense, suffocating silence falls over the nervously sweating military officers as they process the suicidal command. Stepping forward bravely, an officer explains that if this were merely a regular threat, they would have handled it without ever reporting it. The commander reveals that their scouting party used appraisal glasses to identify the territorial beast as a catastrophic great tyrant Asura bear. Utterly oblivious to the monster's legendary reputation, the confused divine ruler demands to know the exact meaning of this report. The subordinate grimly clarifies that regular tyrant Asura bears are S-class demons, meaning this great variant belongs to an impossibly higher tier. Finally grasping the absolute severity of the situation, Bakul recoils in shock as the officer warns that engaging the beast would cost their entire army. Stuttering in sheer disbelief, the terrified ruler realizes that even the legendary demon King Bull never dared to enter the abyssal forest. Gritting his teeth, Bakul admits he still finds it incredibly difficult to believe that the mighty ball is actually dead. Slamming his fists down in a furious tantrum, the ruler curses the filthy animals for daring to interfere with God's divine will. Hyperventilating from his own psychotic rage, the incompetent leader completely abandons all rational strategic thought. The experienced military commanders stare in silent, heavy judgment as their ruler continues his pathetic screaming fit. Walking through the palace corridors after the disastrous meeting, an exhausted officer lets out a heavy, defeated sigh. Asked about their next strategic move, the tired commander bluntly admits they have absolutely no idea what to do. Whispering bitterly about Bakul's incompetence, the officer is quickly shushed by a colleague who fears the ruler might overhear their treasonous complaints. Brushing off the nervous warning, the frustrated commander declares that their country cannot possibly survive under such foolish leadership. Staring blankly into the distance, the disillusioned soldier morbidly confesses that it might be better if their corrupt nation just perished completely. High above the crumbling palace, the holy flag of Jurad flutters ominously against the bright sky. Watching the horizon, Sigmund proudly notes that Asura is doing excellent work patrolling the border. Sable reports a Jurad scouting party retreated after spotting Asura, prompting Sigmund to maintain their passive strategy. Prioritizing caution, the wise butler suggests bolstering the manor's defenses to avoid inciting a full-blown war. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, the undead lord agrees since the holy nation's actions remain completely unpredictable. Remembering the formidable dungeon sentinels, Sigmund confidently proposes constructing specialized golem guards. Sable praises the idea while Sigmund notices Lifar diligently teaching the twin automata how to sew. Smiling at their rapid progress, Lifar happily confirms their aptitude while admitting she is running out of chores. Despite Sable's reassurances, the young Arashan quietly confesses her newfound idleness makes her feel like a burden. Springing into action to build the guards, the vampire lord leaps high to gather necessary materials. Plummeting back to earth, he lands heavily in the freezing, snow-covered crags of a distant mountain range. Gripping a massive boulder, the undead lord effortlessly crushes the solid stone into usable fragments. Surveying the terrain, Sigmund notes the dense rocks are absolutely perfect for crafting battle-type rock golems. Working with tremendous speed, the master rapidly gathers and piles the massive boulders into a neat row. Channeling a massive surge of arcane energy into the lifeless stones, he fiercely casts the creation spell. A blinding magical light erupts as the heavy boulders violently fuse together to form imposing sentinels. Laying out strict directives, Sigmund orders his new rock golems to patrol the walls and dispatch hostile forces. Confident in their strength, the master cheerfully instructs the squad to level up on their journey back. Obeying his absolute command, the massive rock giants immediately march forward into the dense forest to hunt. Stomping through the frozen wilderness, the heavy stone constructs crush everything in their path with terrifying momentum. Spotting wild forest monsters, the ruthless rock golems effortlessly pulverize their targets into the freezing snow. Back safely within the warm manor, Sigmund proudly confirms the exterior golem deployment is finally complete. Eager to upgrade his personal comfort, the undead lord enthusiastically begins crafting a vastly softer mattress. Carefully twisting wire, he notes that while magic easily forges raw iron, hand-shaping delicate springs is incredibly tedious. Despite knowing Lifar rarely sleeps in her room, Sigmund cheerfully commits to manufacturing high-quality mattresses for everyone. Suddenly calling out, Sable and Lifar startle the focused vampire lord, forcing him to quickly clear his head. Regaining composure, Sigmund attentively asks what they want to discuss as his loyal retainers politely request his time. Staring in absolute shock, Sigmund loudly questions their sudden request to be transformed into his vampiric bloodkin. As Sable confirms, Sigmund warns that becoming vampires will permanently and vastly alter their current contractual bond. Acknowledging their growth, Sable explains becoming vampires grants true immortality to overcome their naturally limited lifespans. Glancing down, Sigmund quietly reflects on his past philosophy that mortal existence is precious because it ends. Preparing to gently reject them, the undead lord suddenly pauses, noticing a highly emotional Lifar tightly gripping her skirt. Staring up with fierce determination, Lifar declares losing the chance to serve forever is a far greater tragedy. Bowing respectfully, Sable fiercely echoes the sentiment, refusing to become an unworthy servant who abandons his master. Deeply moved, Sigmund realizes this absolute devotion is an undeniable core of the magic folk's mindset. Scratching his head with a fond smile, the vampire lord softly admits he cannot possibly refuse such heartfelt pleas. Hearing his gentle acceptance, both grandfather and granddaughter instantly light up with overwhelming, radiant joy. Stepping forward with absolute trust, the loyal demons smoothly bare their necks to offer their master their lifeblood. Flustered, Sigmund silently panics because his commoner mindset finds the devotion overwhelming and lacks bloodkin experience. Desperately stalling, he severely warns them that the volatile transformation might curse them with uncontrollable bloodlust. Summoning his swirling magical energy, the cautious master asks one final time if they are truly prepared. Baring their necks with absolute resolve, Sable and Lifar reassure Sigmund that they have been completely prepared from the start. Extending his hands forward as a dark magical aura begins to surge, Sigmund initiates the volatile transformation ritual. Swirling dark energy violently erupts, completely enveloping the grandfather and granddaughter in a brilliant pillar of power. The immense magical pressure forces heavy winds to scatter across the chamber as the transformation reaches its absolute peak. Blinded by the sudden flash, the two loyal demons endure the massive influx of vampiric energy binding to their souls. As the dark magical tempest begins to calm down, a dense mist settles around the kneeling retainers. Nervous about the volatile results, Sigmund anxiously steps forward and checks on how his servants are feeling. Pointing out that the bright noon sun is shining directly on them, Sable anxiously asks if his master is experiencing any adverse side effects. Wiping away their worries with a wave of his hand, Sigmund cheerfully reveals that everything seems perfectly fine. Reviewing their updated stats, Sigmund notes their total resistance to sunlight and silver despite their regenerative abilities falling short of his own. Relieved by the absence of uncontrollable bloodlust, Sable declares the miraculous ritual an absolute success. Fearing they simply got lucky this time, Sigmund privately resolves never to risk creating any additional bloodkin in the future. Meanwhile, heavy rustling sounds echo violently through a freezing, snow-covered clearing deep within the wild forest. Panting heavily in absolute terror, a desperate family of refugees frantically flees from an unseen threat. Heavy, deafening stomps shake the frozen earth as a monstrous predator relentlessly barrels through the thick brush. Crashing through the snow-dusted foliage, a terrifying arachnid beast reveals its massive, multi-legged form. Unleashing a blood-curdling shriek, the savage monster lunges forward to claim its cornered prey. Trapped against the dense thicket, the panicked father desperately prepares to protect his crying children. Terrified by the sudden appearance of another giant spider, the desperate mother screams for her family to run. Cornered from all sides, the helpless refugees brace themselves for an inevitable, bloody end. Dropping from the canopy with terrifying momentum, a massive rock sentinel violently crashes directly into the clearing. Roaring in agony as a boulder-like fist crushes its carapace, the wild monster is heavily pinned to the earth. Stepping silently into the chaotic fray, Nowl watches dispassionately as the heavy stone guard neutralizes the threat. Executing a devastating, perfectly synchronized slash, the twin mechanical maids instantly cleave the raging beast apart. Disintegrating into a harmless puff of gray smoke, the defeated monster vanishes entirely from the frozen battlefield. Staring at the empty snow in absolute shock, the trembling father stammers in sheer disbelief over their sudden rescue. Emerging from the winter shadows, a heavily armed Lifar strictly warns the travelers that this forest is immensely dangerous. Bowing with flawless poise, Sable explains their master warmly invites wanderers and formally requests to escort them to the manor. Recognizing the distinct aura of magic folk, the hyperventilating father realizes they are dealing with immensely powerful entities. Presenting a simple choice, Sable smoothly offers to either guide them directly to the manor or lead them safely out of the woods. Tensely whispering amongst themselves, the exhausted parents desperately weigh their rapidly depleting options. Realizing their children are completely out of energy, the father steps forward and formally accepts the generous invitation. Admitting they have absolutely no hope of braving the wilderness alone, the mother begs the elegant demons to lead the way. Swallowing his lingering anxiety, the young boy tightly grips his mother's hand as they follow the mysterious maids. Welcoming his retainers back to the safety of the estate, Sigmund stands ready to receive the weary travelers. Stepping into the brilliantly lit hall, Sable proudly announces that they have successfully brought their master's new guests. Introducing himself casually, Sigmund instructs the exhausted refugees to cast aside all formality and sit down to rest. Introducing his family as Lunora, Milura, and Lalana, the wary father introduces himself as Vokes. Bowing her head with profound gratitude, Lunora tearfully asks if the young vampire lord was the one who personally saved them. Shrugging off the heavy praise with a warm smile, Sigmund explains he simply happened to pick up on their fading auric signatures by pure coincidence. Addressing his exhausted guests, Sigmund calmly asks if they are nomads. Leaning forward with genuine curiosity, The undead lord gently asks why they would willingly enter such a notoriously dangerous forest. Keeping his head lowered, a grim Vokes quietly reveals that their family was violently assailed. The wary father explains they originally fled the relentless Western wars to seek a peaceful migration in the eastern grasslands. Recalling their simple but quiet life raising livestock, Vokes' story helps Sigmund piece together the timeline of the Demon King's reign. The father's expression darkens as he recounts how a ruthless group of rogue nomads violently attacked their peaceful settlement. Processing the harsh reality of the Eastern Plains, Sigmund realizes displaced war refugees often devolve into desperate bandit factions. With their safe haven utterly destroyed, Vokes admits the desperate family had no choice but to brave the terrifying abyssal forest. Feeling deep sympathy for their misfortune, Sigmund realizes his timely intervention was a miraculous glimpse of hope for the doomed family. Offering a warm and comforting smile, the vampire lord assures the weary travelers that he fully understands their harrowing ordeal. Suddenly, a massive, echoing stomach growl shatters the heavy tension in the dining room. Clutching their empty bellies, the two young children loudly complain to their mother that they are starving. While a flustered Lunora desperately shushes her children and bows in apology, a highly amused Sigmund cheerfully suggests they finally eat. Presented with a massive, mouth-watering feast, the starving family eagerly digs into the spectacular meal. Stuffing their faces with the incredible food, the joyous children loudly declare the meal to be absolutely delicious. Waving off the parents' frantic attempts to enforce table manners, Sigmund warmly notes that it is important for children to be brutally honest. Standing quietly in the background, the twin mechanical maids practically glow with pride over the children's innocent culinary praise. Pouring fresh juice for the kids, the generous host insists the family stay and recover since the manor produces endless food. Granting them temporary sanctuary, Sigmund calmly suggests they take their time recovering before deciding on their next move. Offering to safely escort them back west or to the Demon Kingdom, the undead lord earns a deeply emotional bow of gratitude from the wary father. Stepping forward with flawless butler etiquette, Sable politely offers to escort Mr. Vokes and Mrs. Lunora to their luxurious guest rooms. Watching the exhausted family leave the dining hall, Sigmund silently wonders what difficult path they will eventually choose. Excusing himself with a gentle smile, Sable heads toward the kitchen to happily prepare some extra sweets for the adorable children. Observing his butler's warm demeanor, Sigmund deduces that Sable inherently loves doting on children because of his deep affection for his own granddaughter. Resting his chin on his hand, the vampire lord confidently decides that such inherently good people will inevitably find the right path for their young children. A quiet, moonlit night envelops the peaceful manor while its new guests rest inside. Deep in the guest room, the exhausted children sleep soundly beside their parents. Sitting awake in the dark, an anxious Vokes urgently whispers that they must leave this place immediately. He warns Lunora that living in such a luxurious house deep within the abyssal forest is entirely abnormal. Lunora quietly agrees with her husband's suspicion that their mysterious saviors must be magic folk. Gripping his head in frustration, Vokes stresses the terrifying danger they are currently in. Lunora gently reminds him that without their help, they would be digesting inside a monster's stomach right now. Stroking her sleeping child, she points out that their saviors generously provided warm meals and soft beds. Vokes bitterly asks if he should be happy, prompting Lunora to beg him not to act rude to their hosts. Paranoid and stressed, the father insists this luxurious treatment could simply be a trap to lower their guard. Letting out a heavy, defeated sigh, Lunora listens to her husband's relentless suspicions. Refusing to yield, Vokes stubbornly reiterates that they absolutely cannot trust the magic folk. Turning her back on him, a deeply disappointed Lunora expresses her disbelief at his ungrateful attitude. She angrily questions what good could possibly come from disrespecting the very people who saved their lives. Reminding him of their destitution, she challenges him to consider what their wealthy hosts could possibly want from them. Deflating under her logic, Vokes quietly admits he is simply terrified and worried about her safety. Clenching his fist, the helpless father struggles with his crushing inability to protect his family. Staring into the dark, Vokes firmly declares that he is absolutely certain they are not dealing with regular magic folk. Pouting silently, Lunora refuses to argue further as they settle into an uneasy tension. Meanwhile, sitting alone in his dark room, Sigmund gazes thoughtfully toward the ceiling. Thanks to his passive hearing skill, the vampire lord reluctantly eavesdrops on the couple's entire argument. He notes that the paranoid elves simply refuse to believe their coincidental rescue was an act of pure goodwill. Discussing the guests with Sable, Sigmund marvels at the elves' famously cautious nature regarding other species. Sable points out that returning to the grasslands risks another raid, but adapting to a magic city would be equally difficult. Listening intently, an anxious Lifar fiercely declares she never wants the two young girls to face any more danger. Whisking a bowl of ingredients, Lifar questions why Vokes would remain so hostile toward the person who saved his life. Flashing a knowing grin, Sable smoothly suggests that Vokes's hostility stems from his master's impossibly exemplary nature. Completely baffled by the compliment, Sigmund stares blankly and asks what his butler is talking about. Sable calmly explains that a mighty being like Sigmund might not comprehend the crushing weight of mortal envy. Sweating nervously, the former commoner quickly protests that he perfectly understands what envy feels like. The wise butler details how a destitute Vokes has absolutely nothing left except the desperate urge to protect his family. Sable points out that Sigmund suddenly appeared wielding both overwhelming physical strength and massive financial power. By effortlessly providing the ultimate safety that Vokes failed to secure, Sigmund inherently threatens the desperate father's pride. Realizing the truth, Sigmund sheepishly admits his obsession with self-sufficiency made him forget his massive hoarded wealth. Suggesting a direct talk with the father, Sigmund is quickly interrupted by Sable, who firmly disagrees with that approach. Exchanging a secretive nod with Lifar, the veteran demon cryptically suggests they secretly back Vokes up instead. Sigmund stares in utter confusion as his retainers silently formulate a complex social strategy without him. Shaking off the confusion, Sigmund confirms he would happily welcome their extra hands for farming if they choose to stay. The next morning, the heavy wooden door to the dining hall clicks open. Greeting his guests with a bright, warm smile, Sigmund cheerfully asks if they slept well. Greeting Sigmund warmly, Vokes says good morning and thanks him for the incredibly restful sleep. The excited children eagerly chime in to praise the incredibly soft and fluffy beds. Smiling in relief, Sigmund is silently glad he just finished building those new mattresses. Despite the pleasantries, Vokes casts a tense and cautious sideways glance toward his generous host. Noting the elf's stiff demeanor, Sigmund realizes it will take more than a single day for the wary man to open up. Accepting that all he can do is wait, Sigmund claps his hands together and announces he is digging in. Confused by the phrase, one of the girls curiously asks why he said dibbing in before eating. The adorable children quickly mimic the phrase, giggling playfully as they shout dibbing in together. Watching their innocent joy, Sigmund wonders if he was naturally good with children in his forgotten past life. Later that day, the energetic kids rush outside to play in the winter snow. Standing on the porch, Lunora strictly warns her daughters not to wander past the manor gates. The girls cheerfully acknowledge their mother's rule before sprinting off into the yard. As the kids build a snowman, the massive golem Kugunok gently pats down the snow with its heavy wooden hands. The girls stare in absolute awe as the giant construct peacefully tends to a nearby fruit tree. Identifying the fruit, the golem presents the ripe apples to the completely mesmerized children. With surprising gentleness, Kugunok plucks a fresh apple directly from the snowy branch. Extending its giant wooden hand, the golem kindly offers the sweet fruit to the eager girls. One of the girls takes a massive, joyful bite out of the crisp apple. Her eyes sparkle with delight as she loudly praises the fruit's incredible sweetness. Lunora quickly steps in to remind her daughter she can only have one so she won't ruin her appetite for lunch. The happy child obediently agrees while continuing to happily munch on her delicious snack. Standing nearby, Sigmund watches the heartwarming scene unfold with a fond smile. Turning to Lunora, he notes that a child's endless curiosity is truly a wonderful thing to behold. He gently asks the mother if watching the energetic girls play has tired her out. Flashing a bright grin, Lunora admits that watching them actually makes her feel much more energetic. Sigmund warmly agrees, sharing the uplifting sentiment as they enjoy the peaceful afternoon together. Later on, the quiet corridors of the manor are interrupted by approaching footsteps. A soft, hesitant knock echoes against Sigmund's heavy wooden door. Peeking inside, Lunora asks for a moment to discuss something important, prompting a concerned Sigmund to ask if everything is all right. Nodding firmly, the elven mother receives permission and steps into the room. Getting straight to the point, Lunora asks if it would be possible for her family to live at the manor permanently. Taken aback by the heavy request, Sigmund hums thoughtfully as he processes her words. He carefully asks if Vokes actually agrees with this massive decision, given his blatant desire to leave. Noting their strong bond, Sigmund states he has absolutely no intention of driving a wedge between the married couple. He gently reminds Lunora that her young daughters still desperately need a father figure to look up to. Observing her silence, the undead lord realizes she already deeply understands that painful fact. Preparing to reveal a crucial secret, Sigmund raises a finger to make another important point. Flashing his sharp fangs, he bluntly confesses to the elven mother that he is actually a vampire. Surprised, Lunora points out he was just working in the sun, prompting Sigmund to explain he is a special Ereberos lord immune to sunlight. Regardless of his immunities, he warns her that staying with a vampire might inevitably drag her family into serious trouble down the line. Sigmund advises Lunora to heavily consider his warning and discuss the matter with Vokes once more. Clenching her skirt nervously, Lunora asks if she can pose one final question before leaving, prompting him to allow it. Staring intently, the anxious mother asks if he intends to suck their blood like the vicious vampires from ancient legends. Acknowledging her valid concern, Sigmund firmly states that while drinking blood would make him stronger, he has absolutely no interest in doing so. Flashing a calm, reassuring smile, the undead lord leaves it entirely up to her whether she wants to believe his words. Raising another serious point, Sigmund warns the elven mother that there is one final, crucial disadvantage to staying at the manor. A tense silence hangs in the air as Lunora braces herself for the ultimate condition. Leaning forward, Sigmund bluntly reminds her that there are absolutely no other children living in the isolated forest for Melura and Lalana to interact with. By choosing this secluded life, he explains that she will be forcing her daughters to completely give up any hope of making normal friends to play with. Staring blankly at the unexpectedly grounded point, Lunora processes the heavy weight of her children's future socialization. Breaking into a soft chuckle, Lunora agrees with his surprising wisdom and promises to take that specific concern deeply to heart. Smiling warmly, Sigmund assures her that if they still wish to stay despite the drawbacks, the manor will happily welcome their family. Bowing respectfully, Lunora promises to discuss everything with her husband before the heavy wooden door clicks shut behind her. Fidgeting nervously in the quiet aftermath, Lefar asks what happens next, prompting Sable to calmly offer his master another cup of tea. Accepting the fresh brew with a grateful smile, Sigmund praises his butler by admitting that Sable's tea always perfectly calms his nerves. Working diligently in the fields, the workers rapidly pluck the ripe crops from the soil. Gripping the stubborn roots, someone forcefully rips the vegetation out of the earth. Rustling sounds echo through the peaceful farmland as the steady harvest continues. Wiping the heavy sweat from his brow, a tired worker exhales a deep breath of relief. Calling out across the sunlit fields, a cheerful voice announces that hot tea is finally ready for everyone. Taking a well-deserved break, Lunora happily accepts the invitation to relax with the others. Spotting her energetic children smearing themselves with dirt, the elven mother calls out to Melura and Lalana. Hearing the call for tea time, the excited girls eagerly shout their acknowledgement. Sprinting across the fields, their muddy boots plap heavily against the soft ground. Staring at her daughters in mild shock, Lunora sighs at the absolute mess they have made of themselves. Examining their heavily soiled clothes, she points out just how muddy they have gotten during their playtime. Waving off her concerns, Sigmund instructs the girls to stand still and instantly casts light magic cleansing. A brilliant wave of purifying magic completely washes over the two children. Inspecting their freshly spotless clothes, the girls rejoice over being completely clean once again. Watching the miraculous display, Lunora marvels at how a legendary vampire can effortlessly wield the precious magic of light beings. Chuckling softly at her awe, Sigmund gracefully brushes off the impressive compliment. Admitting he is no nobleman, the undead lord politely asks Lunora to drop the formal master title and simply call him Sigmund. Respecting his humble request, Lunora eagerly shifts the topic to ask what kind of delicious fruit tarts he prepared for them today. The group peacefully settles down to enjoy the beautifully crafted, mouth-watering pastries together. Gazing out at the lush trees and flowing rivers, the mother happily notes how incredibly fulfilling life is here. Praising the pristine environment, she marvels that even the indoor plumbing provides cleaner water than their former city. Absolutely astounded by the stable water supply, Lunora expresses her deep gratitude for the luxurious kitchen, bath, and toilet facilities. Acknowledging the rarity of such comforts, she strictly reminds her daughters not to take the magical luxury for granted. Shifting his attention, Sigmund confronts an armored Vokes, noting that while his family has decided to stay, the elven father clearly has other plans. Adjusting his heavy gear, Vokes silently tightens his straps in preparation for a long journey. Admitting he finally understands Sigmund's genuine kindness, Vokes firmly states that his elven pride prevents him from relying entirely on another species. Staring resolutely ahead, the father declares that this fierce independence is simply a core part of their nature. Recognizing his current inability to provide, Vokes asks the vampire to protect his family while he leaves to secure a true home for them. Despite lacking a way to fully ease the father's mind, Sigmund confidently swears to keep Lunora and the children perfectly safe. Meeting his gaze, Vokes admits he places his absolute trust in his wife's exceptional ability to judge a person's true character. Overwhelmed by Sigmund's generosity, the elf lists the splendorous, overpowered gear the vampire forged for him, including Asura bear leather and a mithril shortsword. Fully equipped in legendary armor, Vokes stands ready to brave the dangerous world outside the forest. Locking eyes with his generous savior, the proud elf solemnly calls out Sigmund's name. Bowing his head with profound, unwavering gratitude, Vokes deeply thanks the undead lord for everything. Accepting the heartfelt thanks, Sigmund watches the determined father prepare for his emotional departure. Gathering around him, his sad family asks if he truly has to leave so soon, but Vokes gently assures them it will be fine. Embracing his beloved wife and daughters, the father shares one last, touching moment of warmth. Promising to definitely return to them, Vokes bids his family a final, tearful farewell. Stepping out into the freezing wilderness, the determined elf prepares to cross the deadly abyssal forest alone. Interrupting his solemn walk, Sigmund reveals that the giant, terrifying Asura bear will be his personal escort, leaving a sweating Vokes to question how he is supposed to ride it. Looking up with innocent concern, a young child anxiously asks if their father is truly leaving. Lunora gently confirms that Vokes must travel far away for work and tenderly asks her daughters to behave until he returns. Processing the heavy news, the little girls stare silently with a mix of sad understanding and reluctance. Waving their small hands enthusiastically, the daughters eagerly shout for their father to come back soon. The massive Asura bear begins its trek through the snowy forest, carrying the fully armored Vokes away on his journey. Deafening stomps shake the frozen earth as the gargantuan beast disappears deep into the dense woodland. Later that day, the children happily gather together while clutching fresh, magical fruit in their tiny hands. Biting into the sweet fruit, the girls chew happily and excitedly exclaim how incredibly yummy their snacks taste. Noting their excellent progress in the fields, Sigmund cheerfully offers Lunora some free time and asks what she would like to do. Stepping forward earnestly, the elven mother humbly requests that he teach Melura and Lalana how to properly read and write. Caught slightly off guard, Sigmund listens as Lunora points out his massive book collection to prove he possesses rare literacy skills. Sable clarifies that human literacy is heavily restricted to nobles, while Sigmund silently realizes the fantasy text simply translates to Japanese in his mind. Acknowledging the rarity of the skill, Sable admits he can read but humbly defers to his master's vastly superior knowledge. Admitting he has never taught anyone before, the undead lord kindly agrees to give the lessons his absolute best effort. Deeply moved by his profound generosity, Lunora bows her head and sincerely thanks him for securing her daughter's future. Retreating to his quiet study, Sigmund prepares a sharp quill and blank parchment to test his own writing capabilities. Realizing he has only ever read books since arriving in this world, he decides to verify his ability to write before attempting to teach. The sharp quill scratches steadily against the rough paper as Sigmund carefully forms the unfamiliar characters. Relying on muscle memory from his past life, he writes a simple phrase and notes that the magical script perfectly resembles Japanese. Handing the fresh parchment to his maid, Sigmund is relieved when Lifar flawlessly reads his newly written phrase aloud. Observing Lifar's seamless comprehension, Sigmund happily notes that she can read his writing without any problems at all. Wondering if some kind of automatic translation magic is at play, the undead lord concludes that the mysterious phenomenon at least makes things remarkably simple. Confident in the magical translation, Sigmund proudly announces that he can successfully teach the children how to write. Meanwhile in the Demon Kingdom, Abaddon grimly reports that they searched their entire territory from border to border but completely failed to locate Sable. Staring intensely, the military official admits the treacherous abyssal forest is the only remaining place they haven't thoroughly searched. Brushing off the dangerous idea, Demoris laughs and admits he simply cannot imagine the veteran demon surviving inside the dreaded abyssal forest. Nodding solemnly, Abaddon acknowledges his colleague's valid concerns regarding the legendary, lethal wilderness. A sweeping view of the imposing abyssal forest border highlights the terrifyingly dense and silent tree line. Standing before the ominous tree line, an official grimly notes that absolutely nothing lies beyond this border except certain death. Glancing back at the dark woods, the determined scouting team completely understands the fatal implications of their terrifying mission. Refusing to abandon his duty, Abaddon firmly declares they must desperately search the forest for the sake of their new demon king. Channeling his arcane energy, a massive burst of dark magic violently erupts around the determined official. Combining his immense magic with a subordinate's avian familiar, Abaddon prepares to safely scout the deepest reaches of the wilderness. Acknowledging that the small bird cannot fight, the official notes this clever strategy allows them to scout the deadly terrain with perfect safety. Flapping its wings gracefully, the dark avian familiar swiftly flutters high into the freezing winter canopy. Soaring through the frigid air, the magical scout effortlessly navigates the dense, snow-covered branches of the abyssal forest. Gliding high above the treacherous terrain, the familiar surveys the seemingly endless expanse of quiet, frozen woods. Pushing deeper into the legendary labyrinth of trees, the tiny scout continues its relentless aerial patrol. Suddenly catching sight of a massive anomaly, a deeply confused Abaddon gasps in sheer bewilderment. Flapping desperately to adjust its trajectory, the tiny familiar slows down to inspect a towering, completely unnatural structure hidden among the trees. Staring through the bird's eyes in absolute shock, the official questions why a massive, fortified wall would ever exist in the middle of a deadly wilderness. Perching silently atop the imposing stone barrier, the dark familiar peers down into the incredibly vast, cultivated courtyard within. Utterly stunned by the impossible sight of a thriving estate in the abyssal forest, the scouting official stares completely speechless at the unbelievable discovery. Staring through the familiar's eyes, a deeply bewildered Abaddon questions what he is looking at. Spotting a massive wooden construct tending the land, the official asks if it is a golem as his familiar flutters closer. The official marvels at the exquisite craftsmanship of the giant sentinel. Soft footsteps echo nearby as someone approaches the garden. Utterly shocked to see young elves giggling playfully, Abaddon wonders why elven children would ever be in such a deadly place. Breaking his partner's concentration, Demaris urgently points out another figure in the distance. The two officials gasp in shock as they finally spot their missing veteran, Sable. Sensing the intrusion, Sable snaps his head toward the spy and delivers a terrifying, piercing glare. Overwhelmed by the intense killing intent, the tiny familiar squeaks in sheer terror. Panicking completely, the dark bird violently flaps its wings and retreats into the sky. Disconnecting from the spell, Demaris notes the familiar fled and suggests they immediately report their findings to the Demon King. Meanwhile at the manor, Lifar turns her head as the strange magical presence vanishes. Breaking the silence, Sigmund firmly calls out his butler's name. The undead lord notes he just sensed a small, harmless, and completely unnatural demon that he had never encountered before. Sable calmly identifies the presence as a familiar, deducing that someone must have used it to safely scout the area. Processing the tactical implication, Sigmund hums thoughtfully. Adjusting his posture, the old butler suspects the spy might have belonged to an old acquaintance of his. Caught off guard by the revelation, a curious Sigmund asks for clarification regarding this acquaintance. Sable explains that he could clearly feel the distinct magical energy of two specific beings radiating from the tiny familiar. He formally identifies the magical signatures as belonging to two of his former colleagues from the Demon Kingdom. Piecing the puzzle together, Sable realizes his old comrades must have noticed his absence and launched a desperate search mission. Sweating nervously, Sigmund realizes what a big deal the scouting mission was and expresses relief that he didn't shoot the bird down. The vampire lord casually points out that the sudden disappearance of the former Demon King's closest advisor would naturally cause massive panic. Bowing his head in shame, Sable admits it was his own failing for not contacting his peers before leaving the kingdom. Stroking his chin in deep thought, the veteran demon formulates a plan to fix his political blunder. Turning to his master, Sable formally requests a short holiday so he can return and explain his new situation to them. Happily granting the request, Sigmund assures him the manor will be fine and encourages him to catch up with his old friends. Beaming with pride, Lifar happily notes that her grandfather is deeply admired even by the highest chancellors. Bowing respectfully to his generous master, Sable promises to return as soon as possible. Flashing a warm smile, the old butler jokes that he cannot stay away too long because they cannot deprive the elven children of their sweets. A grand, imposing view transitions the narrative back to the towering spires of the Demon Kingdom. Sitting heavily upon his dark throne, the current Demon King listens to his scouting party's official report. Leaning forward with intense focus, the ruler demands to know if his officials were truly able to find Sable. Kneeling respectfully, Abaddon firmly confirms they located the retired advisor deep within the abyssal forest. Glancing sharply at his subordinates, the concerned king immediately asks if his beloved mentor is safe. Clarifying they only caught sight of him through a familiar, Abaddon assures the king that Sable appears to be in excellent health. Hesitating for a brief moment, the official admits that they also witnessed something completely bizarre during their reconnaissance. Bracing himself for the king's reaction, Abaddon formally reports that an unknown entity has somehow successfully settled inside the deadly abyssal forest. The official details a massive, fortified manor with open fields where elves and other species are living peacefully together. Utterly furious at the impossible claim, a rival official aggressively accuses Abaddon of either outright lying or suffering from failing eyesight. A beast growls as a tense official angrily questions if Igris thinks he would ever lie to His Excellence. Sweating and fretting, Igris frantically waves his hands and insists the news is simply very surprising. Flicking his hand casually, the Demon King calmly validates Igris's shock since they are discussing the notoriously lethal abyssal forest. Processing the revelation, a subordinate trails off as the massive implications of the discovery finally set in. A stunned official questions the impossible reality of a safe haven existing deep inside the perilous abyssal forest. Stroking his chin in thought, another official wonders if Sable's residence there makes the forest official Demon Kingdom territory. Suddenly struck by a brilliant idea, a chancellor enthusiastically brings up the topic of medicinal herbs. He excitedly explains that the forest's incredibly dense magic energy would massively amplify the potency of any herbs grown there. Realizing the strategic value, the official declares that harvesting those herbs would allow the Demon Kingdom to produce unparalleled, overpowering potions. Devising a diplomatic strategy, the Chancellor suggests offering Sable a handsome reward in exchange for claiming that highly valuable piece of land. A deep, chilling voice suddenly echoes through the chamber, firmly declaring that stealing the land would be a massive problem. A tense silence falls over the shocked royal court as they desperately search for the source of the mysterious voice. Glaring at the sudden intruder, an official frantically demands to know how long Sable has been hiding in the room. Emerging from the shadows, the veteran demon calmly orders them to settle down while an official scolds him for disrespecting the king. Swishing his elegant cape, Sable offers a flawless, respectful bow while the Demon King cheerfully welcomes his old advisor back. Cutting straight to the chase, Sable acknowledges that a highly important matter has suddenly come up regarding his new home. Confirming the topic, the Demon King confidently proposes taking the land in exchange for a suitable reward. Flashing a dark, terrifying grin, the former advisor respectfully but absolutely declines the royal offer. Snapping his fingers in pure outrage, a furious official demands to know if Sable is actively disobeying His Highness's direct orders. Staring coldly at the royal court, Sable firmly declares that he is no longer a citizen of the Demon Kingdom. Closing his eyes with absolute devotion, the veteran demon proudly announces he has found someone truly worthy of dedicating his life to. Slamming his fist onto the table, a furious guard screams at the sheer disrespect. Drawing his blade with a sharp ring, the enraged guard steps forward and threatens to instantly behead the traitor. Before the guard can strike, a sudden, suffocating wave of dark magic violently erupts from Sable's body. Massive pillars of ominous, swirling energy completely engulf the throne room, plunging the court into absolute terror. Sweating profusely under the crushing magical pressure, the paralyzed officials gasp as they fail to comprehend the overwhelming power. Dropping to his knees, an official realizes Sable's terrifying aura completely dwarfs even the former Demon King's legendary strength. Glaring down at the flinching court, Sable coldly notes that if his mere presence paralyzes them, they would be nothing but trash before his master. With absolute authority, Sable strictly warns them never to lay a finger on the land belonging to his master, the Immortal King. Shocked by the title, the Demon King asks if Sable truly found a new master, while the veteran demon threatens the total annihilation of their kingdom. Shrugging off the king's personal curiosity, Sable states his warning has been delivered and ignores any further political banter. Disintegrating into a dense cloud of dark mist, the vampiric butler seamlessly vanishes from the heavily guarded throne room. Rushing to the throne, a panicked official desperately checks on the Demon King, who calmly brushes off the concern. A heavy, tense silence completely suffocates the throne room as the royal court processes the terrifying encounter. Leaning heavily against his throne, the Demon King mutters the title Immortal King, and wonders what kind of godlike being rules that forest. Regaining his composure, the king commands a strict investigation to determine if this mysterious entity poses a fatal threat to the Demon Kingdom. Bowing deeply, the nervous military commanders immediately accept the perilous royal decree. Turning to Abaddon, the Demon King notes that Sable's own son currently serves as one of his direct subordinates. Surprised by the strategic choice, Abaddon confirms that Ludo is indeed serving under his command. The official adds that Ludo's wife, Lagia, is also an active, highly capable subordinate within his military ranks. Pointing decisively, the Demon King formally entrusts Ludo and Lagia with the suicidal mission of investigating the Immortal King's manor. Heavy footsteps echo down the grand hallway as visitors cautiously approach the royal throne room. The massive double doors loudly creak and groan as they are forcefully pushed open. Sitting imposingly upon his dark throne, the Demon King announces that their expected guests have finally arrived. Two elegantly dressed demons step forward and bow deeply to express their humble greetings to His Majesty. Standing firmly at attention, Civil Officer Rude and Military Officer Largia formally announce their presence at the King's command. Stepping down from the dais, Igris instructs the stiff officers to relax while the Demon King casually nods in agreement. Glaring intensely, Igris informs the nervous pair that they are being entrusted with an incredibly important mission. Sweating under the heavy royal pressure, Rude silently wonders what kind of massive operation requires seeing His Majesty in person. Breaking the tense silence, Igris bluntly asks if the two officers know of the legendary abyssal forest. The royal official reveals that they have discovered two of their family members, Sable and Lifar, residing deep within the deadly woods. Utterly blindsided by the impossible news, both officers freeze in absolute, wide-eyed shock. Stammering nervously, Rude questions the intel since he only knew Sable retired near the forest, proving they were completely unaware of the truth. Stepping forward smoothly, Abaddon firmly confirms the sighting by stating he and Lord Demoris witnessed it directly through a familiar. Acknowledging the unbelievable nature of the report, Abaddon explains that Mr. Sable has somehow managed to physically evolve. Hearing the impossible claim, the married couple gasps in sheer disbelief at the terrifying word evolve. The Demon King watches the family's dramatic reaction with cold, calculating silence. Recovering his composure, Rude recalls ancient texts stating that reaching a maximum level limit allows a being to ascend into a higher-ranking species. Sweating profusely, an embarrassed Igris quickly agrees with the civil officer, exposing that he actually had absolutely no idea how the evolution worked. Returning to the main objective, Igris officially commands the pair to enter the forest and check on Mr. Sable's well-being. Suddenly breaking protocol, a frantic Largia gasps and begs the officials to hold on for a moment. Shrugging off her husband's attempts to calm her, the terrified mother demands to know if her daughter Lifar is okay. Analyzing the magical signatures from the familiar, Abaddon confidently deduces that Lifar is perfectly safe and still with her grandfather. Largia nods in profound relief while Abaddon casually insults Igris by claiming her sharp composure is wasted serving under him. Channeling his immense dark energy, the Demon King suddenly summons a massive, glowing magical map into the air. Pointing to a glowing red blip, the king reveals exactly where the missing family members are located. Rude panics upon realizing the coordinates are dead center in the forest, while Largia cries out for her adorable daughter. Staring coldly at the map, the Demon King prepares to reveal the most disturbing piece of intelligence yet. The imposing ruler deduces that Sable and Lifar only managed to evolve because they swore absolute loyalty to a powerful new master. He formally commands the officers to find this so-called Immortal King, and determine if he poses a threat to the Demon Kingdom. Rude repeats the terrifying title as the king nods, confirming that is exactly what Sable called his mysterious lord. Warning them that survival is not guaranteed, the king graciously offers them the chance to refuse the suicidal mission without blame. Pushing past their paralyzing fear, both Rude and Largia eagerly accept the deadly assignment to rescue their family. Meanwhile, far away in the peaceful abyssal forest, the sun shines brightly over Sigmund's luxurious manor. Returning exactly as planned, Sable confirms to his master that the Dark Familiar was indeed sent by the Demon Kingdom. Welcomed back by Lifar, the veteran demon confidently assures Sigmund that his stern warning will deter any more strange royal activity. Several peaceful days pass, leaving Sigmund to deeply reflect on his butler's supposedly reassuring promise. Suddenly jolting upright, the undead lord gasps as an unfamiliar sensation washes over him. Staring intensely toward the dense tree line, Sigmund senses a sudden, deliberate disturbance crossing into their territory. Turning urgently to his retainers, he asks if Lifar and Sable can also feel the distinct magical energy of two people approaching. Sweating with sudden realization, Lifar confirms the presence and identifies the magical signatures as her parents, Rude and Largia. Sable calmly notes that the forest is incredibly dangerous for his son Rude and Largia due to their remarkably low magic levels. Volunteering to safely escort her parents to the manor, Lifar casually remarks that letting them die in the woods would be a bothersome inconvenience. Confused by her surprisingly cold phrasing, Sigmund asks if her parents simply came to the forest to visit them. Sable quickly corrects his master, deducing that the two officers were officially sent by the Demon Kingdom to thoroughly investigate this new territory. Feeling slightly responsible for the political intrusion, Sigmund warmly promises to personally welcome her family to repay his retainer's unwavering loyalty. Realizing the strategic advantage, the undead lord notes that returning the royal officers safely will perfectly prove his peaceful intentions to the demon kingdom. Prioritizing their current guest safety, Sable smartly suggests hiding Lunora and her daughters in a secure guest room away from the demonic officials. Agreeing with the vigilant strategy, Sigmund calls out to Lunora in the garden and cheerfully announces a sudden treat break. Waving toward the muddy children, the vampire lord enthusiastically announces that they have prepared a massive batch of delicious sweets. Hearing the magical word, the two young elven girls instantly light up with radiant, overwhelming joy. Sprinting eagerly across the grass, the excited children loudly demand to know exactly what kind of candy awaits them inside. Halting their muddy charge, Sigmund effortlessly casts a radiant cleansing spell before they can track heavy dirt into the pristine manor. Lunora attempts to scold her daughters about washing their hands, but the girls gleefully point out they are already perfectly clean. Chuckling at their clever loophole, Sigmund happily calls out to his twin mechanical maids for immediate assistance. Bowing with flawless grace, Blanc and Noir obediently accept the order to escort the elven family to their secure room and serve them sweets. Preparing for her treacherous trek, Lefar announces she will retrieve her parents while Sable remains behind to handle the formal hospitalities. Left entirely alone in the Grand Hall, Sigmund patiently prepares to act as the perfect, welcoming host. High above the unforgiving wilderness, the dark canopy of the abyssal forest violently rustles in the freezing winter wind. Deep within the suffocating woods, Rude and Largia nervously navigate through the massive, twisted roots. Whipping their heads back and forth, the terrified military officers desperately scan the shadows for lurking predators. Thick, overgrown grass waves ominously around their trembling legs as they push further into the unknown. Suddenly, a heavy, terrifying rustle violently echoes through the dense thicket right beside them. Frantically shushing his panicked wife, Rude whispers for her to stay completely silent. He quietly warns her that they must tread incredibly carefully to avoid drawing the attention of wild, bloodthirsty monsters. Pressing their backs tightly against a massive tree trunk, the terrified couple hides as a massive shadow swoops violently overhead. A suffocating, dead silence instantly falls over the frozen, isolated woodland. Peeking cautiously around the heavy bark, Rude breathes a heavy sigh of relief as he realizes the unseen beast has finally left. The tall, dark grass continues to wave gently in the eerie, lingering quiet. Resuming their perilous trek, the highly anxious officers carefully tiptoe deeper into the unforgiving environment. Wiping the cold sweat from his brow, an exhausted Rude forcefully exhales a heavy breath of relief. Dropping silently from the dense canopy above, Lifar suddenly appears and cheerfully notes that her parents look completely unharmed. Smiling warmly at her completely stunned family, the young Arashna expresses immense relief that she managed to find them in time. Staring at the girl in absolute disbelief, the completely paralyzed parents loudly gasp their beloved daughter's name. Unbeknownst to the young maid, a massive, terrifying presence silently creeps up directly behind her. The horrified parents' eyes widen in pure, unadulterated terror as they spot the looming, deadly threat. Screaming desperately for his daughter to run away, Rude is completely baffled when Lefar casually dismisses his sheer panic. Pointing casually past them, Lefar bluntly warns her parents that they are actually the ones standing in grave danger. Instantly, the thick, thorny brush directly behind the terrified officers violently rustles and snaps apart. A massive, terrifying beast violently emerges from the dark shadows right at their vulnerable backs. Unleashing a deafening, blood-curdling growl, the gargantuan monster ambushes the paralyzed officers and forces them to shriek in absolute terror. Largia frantically cries out for her darling as Rude bravely shields her from the imminent threat. The terrifying monster lunges forward with a vicious screech, causing the helpless couple to shriek in terror. Suddenly, a massive claw violently slashes through the air and completely annihilates the attacking beast. The ambush predator is instantly obliterated, its messy remains splashing harmlessly across the dark forest floor. Staring at the carnage in absolute shock, a paralyzed Rude stammers and frantically questions what just happened. Deafening footsteps shake the earth as the gargantuan Asura bear ominously steps out of the thick brush. Towering over the terrified couple, the massive beast exhales a hot, heavy breath directly onto them. Realizing they are miraculously unharmed, Rude bewilderedly asks if the legendary monster actually just protected their lives. Stepping confidently from the shadows, Lefar proudly explains that Asura is also a loyal follower of her master. Rude repeats the word follower, in pure disbelief, utterly stunned that anyone could ever tame an Asura bear. Completely overwhelmed by sheer terror and the terrifying revelation, Rude violently wobbles on his trembling feet. Collapsing backward into the grass, Rude faints as a panicked Largia desperately cries out for her husband. Shaking his limp body, Largia violently slaps his cheek and frantically begs him to pull himself together. Trembling intensely, Rude questions exactly how much impossible power this immortal king holds to casually tame such beasts. Chuckling softly at their terrified reaction, Lifar confidently offers to guide the shaken couple back to her master's manor. Leaves snap and shuffle as the group steadily marches through the dense forest. Carrying her unconscious father over her shoulder, Lifar confidently leads her mother through the treacherous woods. Trailing closely behind, Largia marvels at how terrifying it is that her daughter's master can tame a legendary, high-class tyrant Asura bear. The anxious mother wonders what kind of impossible being this immortal king must be just as Lifar announces their arrival. A breathtaking view of the grand, sprawling manor completely opens up through the winter trees. Staring in absolute shock, Largia gasps as she takes in the impossible sight of a massive estate hidden in the deadly wilderness. Spotting towering figures in the distance, the bewildered mother points and asks if they are actual golems. Lifar casually confirms the massive constructs were built by their master specifically to help cultivate the sprawling fields. Largia struggles to process the sheer absurdity of using such powerful magical entities merely for farming. Staring closely at the working giants, she notes that the 4 golems look incredibly dangerous and strong. Lifar admits they are strong compared to the outside world, but aside from the largest golem Kugunok, the others can barely survive walking through this forest. Brushing off her mother's concerns, Lifar brightly suggests they finally head inside the manor. Sweating nervously, Largia realizes that a mere farming golem capable of surviving the abyssal forest would effortlessly overpower anyone in the demon kingdom. The heavy wooden door clicks sharply as the group enters the grand estate. Stepping confidently into the immaculate hall, Lifar cheerfully announces that she has brought their unexpected guests home. Bowing with deep respect, Largia formally greets her father-in-law Sable as he warmly welcomes his granddaughter back. Flashing a knowing grin, Sable acknowledges Largia before letting out a disappointed sigh over his pitiful, unconscious son. Without a shred of hesitation, Lifar unceremoniously dumps her passed-out father face-first onto the polished floor. Largia scolds Sable for recklessly vanishing without contacting his family, admitting they were completely consumed by worry. Chuckling softly at her concern, the veteran demon smoothly claims he is flattered while clearly showing zero remorse. Bluntly interrupting the family reunion, Lifar strictly orders her elders to stop chatting and hurry up to meet the master. Agreeing with a sharp swish of his elegant cape, Sable suggests they immediately proceed with the introductions. A pathetic groan echoes from the floorboards as a dazed Rude slowly begins to stir from his terrified faint. Disgusted by his weak display, Lifar mercilessly channels a swift burst of water magic. A violent splash of freezing water directly strikes Rude's face, forcing him to gasp and sputter awake. Largia gently scolds her daughter to treat her father better, but a deeply embarrassed Lifar coldly dismisses the meager man. Blinking away the water, an utterly disoriented Rude helplessly asks his family where they are. Looking down with cold authority, Sable sharply notes that his pathetic son is finally awake. Groaning miserably, Rude visibly flinches as he recognizes his incredibly imposing father. Sable sternly demands how long Rude intends to keep up this unsightly display and barks at him to stand up immediately. Scrambling quickly to his feet, Rude nervously adjusts his soaked clothes under his father's terrifying glare. Gesturing toward the inner halls, a tense Sable orders them to follow and explicitly warns against showing any further disrespect to his master. Utterly stunned, Rude stammers in complete disbelief at hearing the fiercely independent Sable actually refer to someone as a master. Still completely paralyzed by the impossible concept, the civil officer is struck entirely speechless. Ignoring her husband's ongoing panic attack, Largia calmly asks her father-in-law to please lead the way. The elegant mother walks silently behind Sable down the pristine, beautifully constructed corridor. Largia marvels internally at how deeply loyal her fiercely rebellious daughter and independent father-in-law have suddenly become toward this mysterious entity. Opening a heavy door, the group enters a luxurious lounge and settles down onto a set of plush seating. Leaning back into the cushions, Sable casually mentions that this incredibly comfortable sofa was personally handcrafted by their master. Completely baffled by the revelation that an immortal king does casual carpentry, Largia blankly stammers in sheer confusion. Lifar proudly reveals her master created the entire manor, furniture, and fields. Overwhelmed, Largia wonders what kind of godlike being their master could possibly be. The heavy door to the grand parlor suddenly clicks open. The nervous parents brace themselves as they step into the bright room. Sitting casually, Sigmund smiles and warmly welcomes his terrified guests. Sigmund internally regrets not asking Sable about Demon Kingdom greeting customs. Staring at the gentle youth, Lagia and Rude freeze in absolute shock. Suffocating under immense magical pressure, a paralyzed Rude sweats profusely. Gesturing gracefully, Sigmund kindly invites the trembling couple to sit down. Gasping for air, Rude struggles against the host's terrifying aura. Rude realizes he nearly lost his composure under the crushing presence. Accepting tea, Rude thanks him while silently panicking. The terrified officer internally concludes this impossible being is a freak of nature. Lagia nervously wonders how they can possibly report this anomaly to the king. Clearing her throat, the elven mother forces herself to speak. Lagia respectfully introduces herself and thanks the Lord for having them. Rude tries introducing himself but Sable violently bonks his head. Clutching his bruised skull, Rude whines about the painful strike. Lifar slaps Rude for disrespect while Sable apologizes to his master. Lagia bows in embarrassment, begging forgiveness for her husband's attitude. Pitying the battered man, Sigmund kindly asks them to stop hurting him. Sigmund humbly reminds Lagia he requires no strict reverence. Sable firmly rejects this, insisting magic folk cannot overlook disrespect toward the strongest. Sigmund sharply counters that such outdated thinking led to the former king's violence. Rude wonders if the master's composure stems from knowing his absolute power. Shifting his glare, Sable coldly asks if they risk death just to investigate. Trapped by the fierce interrogation, the parents sit in tense silence. Sigmund gently orders his loyal butler not to be so harsh. Sigmund reveals he never expected the kingdom to send Sable's family on a suicide mission. Sable deduces Demoris manipulated Abaddon because he knew Sable would rescue his family. Lagia gasps in horror, realizing the chancellors went to ruthless lengths for a background check. Lifar scowls, blaming Sable for vaguely name-dropping the Immortal King before vanishing. A muffled Rude realizes that claiming daylight immunity essentially declared war. Lagia gags her babbling husband as he points out the leaders couldn't ignore this threat. Apologizing, Sigmund assures them he simply chose to peacefully retire here. Declaring peaceful intentions, Sigmund warmly invites them to visit anytime. Sigmund kindly asks for a warning familiar next time, which they eagerly agree to. Smiling contentedly, the vampire lord feels relieved his diplomacy worked. Shattering the peace, Sable proudly interjects that they still view the Demon Kingdom as home. Leaving Rude stunned, Sable commands him to warn invaders that he and Lifar will defend their homeland. Sigmund exhales quietly, hoping his diplomatic words will be enough to satisfy the royal officials' concerns. Clapping his hands together loudly, the vampire lord suddenly shatters the tense atmosphere in the room. Smiling warmly, he notes that their tired guests have traveled far and declares an end to all serious political talk. Turning his attention away from the bewildered parents, Sigmund gently calls out to his two loyal retainers. The master asks his servants to prepare a warm meal and a bath, prompting a deeply respectful bow from Sable. A flustered Lifar quickly snaps to attention, eagerly instructing her stunned parents to follow her into the hall. Wiping sweat from his brow, Sigmund breathes a massive sigh of relief as Sable praises his flawless handling of the delicate situation. The generous lord graciously grants Lifar the night off to spend time with her family, earning a deeply grateful thanks from the young maid. Handing over a pristine bottle, Sigmund cheerfully offers them some high-quality wine to help ease their lingering nerves. Safely secured in their guest room, Rude and Lagia both express their absolute, lingering shock over the terrifying master. Exploring the luxurious bathroom, an utterly bewildered Rude marvels at the impossible convenience of warm water flowing straight from the tap. Bouncing happily on the incredibly soft bedding, Lagia questions how mere magic could possibly maintain such an impossible, constant heat source. Downing the master's homemade wine in huge gulps, the stressed officer admits that absolutely everything about this isolated manor defies logic. Despite the warm hospitality, Rude still violently trembles as the sheer terror of the Immortal King continues to haunt him. Watching her parents spiral into confusion over the mysterious lord, Lifar calmly reiterates that he is simply their beloved master. The chaotic, lively evening finally winds down as the exhausted family settles in for a peaceful night of sleep. The next morning, the wary parents safely depart the dangerous forest and successfully return to the Demon Kingdom. Standing on the manor's porch, Sigmund exhales a heavy sigh of relief that they somehow survived the intense political ordeal. Flashing a bright smile, Lifar happily reports that her parents left the estate feeling incredibly satisfied with their visit. Sable smoothly adds that Lunora and her 2 daughters managed to stay completely hidden without causing any trouble. Overhearing the conversation, a pouting elven girl storms over and angrily scolds the old butler for mispronouncing her name. Puffing out their cheeks in frustration, the adorable girls fiercely demand to be called by their preferred nicknames, Lala and Mailu. Flustered by their innocent ferocity, Sable quickly apologizes and correctly addresses Lala and Mailu, instantly earning their happy giggles. Watching the girls play happily, Lifar suddenly adopts a serious expression as a new concern enters her mind. Approaching her master with a look of deep concentration, the young maid requests a moment to discuss something important. She urgently points out that they need a reliable way to protect the children in case unpredictable guests or intruders sneak up on them again. Lowering her head, Lunora admits her own frustrating lack of combat skills makes her completely unable to protect her daughters. Sigmund quickly reassures the worried mother, stressing that forcing her to fight and putting herself in danger is absolutely not an option. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, Sable steps forward and cleverly suggests assigning a magical familiar to guard the children. Processing the brilliant idea, Sigmund realizes a familiar could act as the perfect, ever-present bodyguard for the young girls. The veteran butler explains that a cute, pet-like familiar would effortlessly protect them without causing the children any unnecessary fear. Hearing the magical word, Lala and Mailu gasp in absolute delight as their eyes sparkle with overwhelming excitement for a new pet.